Hey guys, tonight we slip into Kobe's midnight alleys where Kiyoshi Takayama smokes under a flickering street lamp, daring anyone to blink first. The street's quiet, but not asleep. Vending machines hum softly beside rusting bicycle racks, and somewhere in the distance, a train murmurs by like a ghost avoiding eye contact. You can almost hear the sigh of neon signs giving up their last breath of color above a ramen shop that never really closes. Kiyoshi Takayama is standing still. Not hiding, just waiting. The kind of man who makes a whole block feel smaller by standing still. If courage wore cologne, this guy bottled it in silence and sold it wholesale. Now, just a quick note. You probably won't survive this world if you walk in wearing sneakers and optimism. This isn't the Hollywood version with shootouts and slow-motion betrayals. It's colder, quieter, realer. And that silence? It's where men like Takayama thrive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where in the world you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts in Kobe, the port city where concrete meets coastline and tradition collides with neon. The year, 2010. The mood? Tense, like the city's holding its breath while the underworld rearranges its furniture. That's the year Kiyoshi Takayama, often called the Shate no Osama, the king of the lieutenants, becomes the most talked about man in Japanese organized crime. But let's not rush into his power plays just yet. To understand why this man could turn silence into strategy and stare down prosecutors like they were mid-level clerks, we have to go back, way back to Himeji. In the late 1940s, Himeji is not the tranquil castle town tourists know today. Post-war hunger gnaws at bellies, black markets bloom beside temples, and children grow up fast. Takayama is born into this crucible, a Japan rebuilding itself brick by cautious brick. His father works a quiet job in the city. His mother runs a small home shop where tea is served more for gossip than profit. It's not poverty, but close enough that Kiyoshi knows how to spot an empty rice bowl from across the street. He is quiet from the beginning, not shy, just calculating. At school, teachers describe him as unremarkable, which is exactly how he wants it. One day, he watches an older boy get hit across the face with a wooden sandal for stealing a pencil. Kiyoshi doesn't flinch. He just watches, takes mental notes. The boy shouldn't have stolen in broad daylight. Shouldn't have chosen someone with an older brother in the fire brigade. That's his first education. Not from books, but from consequence. By the time he's 12, he's already figured out which corner store clerks will let you run a tab, which gang kids pick fights they can't finish, and which alleyways echo too much for secret meetings. He's not a fighter, not yet, but there's a weight to him, like a stone in the middle of a shallow stream. The other boys flow around him, never quite making contact. One day, a teenage cousin from Kyoto visits with slicked back hair, polished shoes, and a silver lighter he flicks like punctuation. This cousin, Hiroshi, is what the family calls Benria, a fixer. He works for a local construction company, but everyone knows that's a euphemism. What he really does is make introductions, find solutions, smooth over accidents. Hiroshi sees something in young Kiyoshi, not just potential, control. Most kids bounce between anger and joy like ping-pong balls, not Kiyoshi. His mood is measured, always 2 steps behind his eyes. That summer, Hiroshi lets him tag along on errands, dropping envelopes, counting crates, offering silent nods to men in black cars with spotless lapels. Kiyoshi doesn't ask questions. That's his gift. On one of these errands, they walk through a crimson-lit alley in Kyoto's Gion district. Women in pale makeup glance up from behind Norin curtains, and men with low voices laugh too loudly behind paper doors. A fight breaks out near a hostess club. Two drunk soldiers, probably American, swinging fists like amateurs. One of Hiroshi's associates steps in, says a few words, and suddenly it's over. Apologies are mumbled, shoulders are patted, money discreetly changes hands. No police, no screaming, just correction. That moment sticks. Violence, Kiyoshi learns, is not the show. It's the punctuation. What matters is how you place the sentence before it. By 16, he's out of school. Not kicked out, just done with the charade. He starts working odd jobs. Delivery boy, pachinko runner, eventually parking cars at a nightclub frequented by local big shots. He watches everything, learns who tips, who bluffs, who drinks too fast. One night, a well-dressed man forgets a briefcase in the back of his car. Kiyoshi returns it unopened. The next week, he gets promoted. Not officially. Just moved closer to the door everyone else tries not to look at. He's now brushing shoulders with the Yamaguchi-gumi, the largest yakuza syndicate in Japan. But back then, they're still rebuilding their empire, still defining their rules in a changing world. The 1970s in Japan are an odd mix. Economic boom on the surface, underworld wars underneath. And in that chaos, Kiyoshi begins to rise. But he doesn't do it by being loud. No flashy cars, no golden watches, no declarations of loyalty screamed over cheap sake. Instead, he becomes the guy who never forgets a name, who shows up 5 minutes early, who never speaks when silence will do. Many people still think that in a world built on hierarchy and ritual, you need blood to climb. But what if precision works just as well? So what do you think? Would you trust the quiet kid who doesn't blink when someone gets slapped? Or the loud one who cries vengeance every 10 minutes? Because only one of them is going to end up commanding a criminal empire with a whisper. Himi fades behind him like a chalk sketch in the rain. And by the time Kiyoshi Takayama is in his early 20s, he's settled into the shadows of Kyoto's deeper alleys. He's no longer the boy who observed from doorways. Now, he walks through them without being stopped. The early 1970s in Japan are fluorescent and frantic. Salarymen collapse on trains after too much whiskey. Department stores stay open late, beaming a new kind of prosperity across cities still haunted by war rubble. But beneath all that polished concrete lies the rusted infrastructure of another empire, the one that doesn't issue business cards, but still calls all the shots. Kiyoshi finds himself apprenticing under a mid-tier Yamaguchi-gumi officer in Kyoto. This man, Okamoto-san, smells like aftershave and charcoal, with the kind of voice that makes even telephone calls sound like threats. He runs a collection route for gambling debts, protection fees, and the occasional side hustle involving smuggled electronics. Okamoto is old school, the type who tests loyalty with both kindness and cruelty, often in the same breath. He sees something in Kiyoshi, a diamond in a pile of obedient glass. The apprenticeship begins with silence. Kiyoshi rides shotgun, doesn't talk, doesn't fidget, just watches. He notices who flinches when Okamoto opens his jacket, who asks too many questions, and who never says thank you after handing over an envelope. He catalogs faces and habits the way a detective might, except he's not looking to arrest anyone, just to learn what makes them fold. One afternoon, a confrontation turns physical. A young bar owner refuses to pay his monthly dues, claiming he already coughed up to a rival group. Okamoto slaps him, just once, but it's Kiyoshi who steps forward after. He kneels, picks up the man's fallen cigarette, lights it, offers it back with a nod. The gesture is small, almost elegant, but the message is unmistakable. You were just spared. Take it, smoke it, and don't forget the taste of mercy. It's the first time Okamoto calls him Kozo, meaning brat or kid, but with a smirk that suggests respect. That night, as they ride back through Kyoto's narrow streets, Okamoto finally breaks the silence. You don't blink, he says. Good. But blinking's not weakness. Just means you've weighed the danger and chosen not to pretend you're God. Kiyoshi stores that away. By 23, he's handling collections on his own. Not the big ones, but enough to test his rhythm. He doesn't shout or hit. He leans in, speaks softly, and lets the silence hang like a noose. Most people, it turns out, pay just to make that silence go away. He earns a reputation, not the kind you write headlines about, but the kind that makes bar owners straighten their backs when he enters. People say he doesn't smile because he doesn't need to. That if he ever did, it would be to signal the end of something. An era, a man, or just a deal gone cold. In one quiet month, Kiyoshi personally recovers over 10 million yen in delinquent debts. No broken fingers, no police reports, just receipts and rumors. But in the world of the Yamaguchi-gumi, quiet success doesn't go unnoticed. Soon, he's invited to Kobe. And here's where things take a sharp turn. Kobe, the syndicate's beating heart, is more polished than Kyoto, more corporate. The offices don't smell like sweat and soy sauce. They smell like expensive ink and ambition. Here, Takayama meets the upper echelons of a criminal empire that operates more like a multinational corporation than a street gang. Men in pinstripe suits bow at perfect angles. The elevators have leather interiors. Some rooms are so quiet, you can hear the click of a fountain pen 3 doors down. It's in one of these boardrooms that Kiyoshi meets Masahisa Takanaka. Takanaka is no ordinary oyabun. He's the kind of leader who reads American business journals and quotes them in meetings. He doesn't scream. He delegates. He doesn't demand loyalty. He breeds it. His office doesn't have swords on the wall. It has contracts. But make no mistake, he's every bit the Don. He watches Kiyoshi with the gaze of a man who already knows the ending and just wants to see how well the boy plays his part. They don't talk much. But when Takanaka offers him a drink, single malt, nothing local, Kiyoshi accepts it with both hands and doesn't flinch at the taste. From that point forward, he's marked for promotion. Within months, he's reassigned to Osaka, a city pulsing with cash, corruption, and barely controlled chaos. His new role? Managing the collection and enforcement wing for several rackets across the city's east side. It's both a reward and a test. Osaka doesn't welcome strangers. It tests them with backdoor deals, rogue enforcers, and unpredictable alliances. But Kiyoshi doesn't arrive like an invader. He moves in like a tenant, quiet, observant, respectful, and yet his influence expands almost too quickly. People who once answered to 3 different lieutenants now call him directly, not because they have to, but because they want to. They trust him, or at least they fear what he doesn't say. He recruits his team the same way a surgeon selects instruments, based on precision, not noise. No hotheads, no glory seekers, just men who understand that a whisper carries farther when the world is screaming. One night, his crew visits a club known for harboring loud-mouthed dealers. Kiyoshi doesn't enter with a weapon. He sits at the bar, orders a shochu, and waits. Within 20 minutes, the music dies down. The dealer walks out with a pale face and an envelope. No one says what happened, but by morning, the club changes ownership. And the next week, the syndicate's profits triple. This is how he earns the name Kurogane, the Iron One, not because he crushes opposition with force, but because, like forged steel, he bends only on his own terms and always remembers where the heat came from. Many people still think that the yakuza world rewards blood over brains, that only the loud survive. But how do you explain a man like Takayama, who rises without shouting, conquers without fighting, and commands without demanding? So what do you think? If you owed money to someone like him, would you fear the fist or the pause before it? The Osaka night doesn't sleep. It simmers. Pachinko parlors flicker in perpetual twilight. Ramen stalls hiss like stage smoke. And somewhere, always, a deal changes hands beneath a neon billboard no one looks at. In this haze, Kiyoshi Takayama thrives, not as a brawler or a braggart, but as a conductor orchestrating silence into influence. His rise, by this point, is no longer accidental. It's engineered, carefully, intentionally. His every step through Osaka's underbelly leaves no visible trace, yet the city's tempo adjusts to him. It starts with a small change. He implements a new rule for his collectors: no violence unless absolutely necessary. Some scoff, whispering that Takayama's gone soft, but then the numbers come in. Payments rise, complaints drop, and the police, always sniffing for chaos, back off when they can't find bruises to investigate. One of his senior collectors, a man named Tanabe, questions the strategy. Fear, Tanabe says, has always come in the shape of fists. Kiyoshi's response is soft, almost tired. Then you've never truly scared someone. The quiet kind of fear is the one they don't forget. Within a month, Tanabe adopts the method. Within 6, he swears he invented it. This is Takayama's gift, not just commanding obedience, but making people think the good ideas were theirs. Still, there's blood when necessary. In 1975, an Osaka club owner under his protection is stabbed in a back alley by an independent thug with delusions of territory. The wound is shallow, but the insult is deep. Takayama doesn't shout, doesn't storm. He invites the attacker to a private sit-down through an intermediary. Surprisingly, the man shows. They meet in a tea room, sunlight filtered through paper screens, the scent of incense threading the air like a warning. No yelling, no threats. Kiyoshi pours the tea himself, a rare gesture. "You understand," he says, eyes unreadable. "You've wounded a man under my roof." The thug, nervous now, mutters some apology. He's sweating. Takayama doesn't move. He just says, "You'll leave Osaka tonight. You'll never come back. If I hear your name again, I won't." And then the pause. A long, unnerving stillness. The man leaves, disappears. No body, no blood trail, just absence. The underworld takes the hint. Soon, Takayama earns his formal Wakagashira status, deputy boss, within the Osaka division. He's still young, barely 30, but already rumors attach themselves to his name like static. Some say he was trained by monks in northern Kyoto. Others whisper he once convinced a rival lieutenant to surrender a district without firing a shot, just a single glance across a crowded restaurant. He neither confirms nor denies any of it, and yet his myth grows. It's around this time that he begins attracting attention outside of Kansai. Tokyo bosses raise eyebrows. Nagoya men nod slowly over their cups. Even Shinobu Tsukasa, then a rising star in Kobe's upper tier, takes note. The two don't meet yet, not directly. But there are nods across rooms, mutual respect passed like envelopes between associates. But with attention comes tension. A man in his own Osaka circle, Morioka, begins pushing back, calls Takayama's methods too modern, his policies too soft. The grumbling escalates when a few of Morioka's men defect to Kiyoshi's ranks, drawn by discipline, steady income, and a surprising sense of order in an otherwise chaotic life. Then one day, Morioka doesn't show up to a scheduled meeting. The next week, he's reassigned to a remote district, officially due to family health matters. Unofficially, everyone knows he was given a choice: move or be moved. Takayama, again, never raises his voice. One former lieutenant famously says, "You never hear the threat coming from him. You just feel the room get colder." That winter, a well-known Kyoto reporter publishes a short profile on rising figures in Japan's underworld. Takayama is mentioned only once. A footnote, unassuming but precise, may prove dangerous. When asked about it later, Takayama reportedly chuckled and said, "They got 2 out of 3. By the late 1970s, Osaka's underworld no longer moves without checking his pulse. Disputes go through him. Business routes shift based on his advice. When he walks into a room, conversations pause, not from fear, but from calibration. And this is when Masahisa Takanaka calls again, only this time it's not for a promotion. It's an invitation to Kobe, to the very top. The call comes quietly, over tea. Takanaka says only, "Come home." Kiyoshi does. Kobe's Yamaguchi-gumi headquarters doesn't dazzle from the outside. It's a modest building, unmarked, tucked between a supermarket and a florist. But inside, it feels like a temple. No laughter, no chaos. Just quiet, pressed suits and pressed lips. Takayama walks in, bows once, and is taken directly to the 5th floor. There, he meets Shinobu Tsukasa for the first time. Not at a party, not during a handshake summit, but in a room without windows. Tsukasa wears a black suit, sits cross-legged on a tatami mat, and offers nothing but a gesture to sit. What follows is not a conversation. It's an interview in the form of silence. 5 minutes pass before either speaks. Tsukasa says, "Osaka listens to you." Takayama nods. Tsukasa says, "You make men obedient without breaking them." Takayama nods again. Then Tsukasa smiles. "You're dangerous. That's useful." And just like that, Kiyoshi becomes his shadow lieutenant. An unofficial title with all the weight of a throne. He's not next in line. He's the hand that steadies the blade. Many people still think that criminal empires need leaders who scream orders and break things to prove their strength. But what if true power is when people follow you without ever knowing why? So what do you think? Is it fear that builds empires? Or is it the stillness before the storm? When Kiyoshi Takayama first settles into Kobe as a permanent presence, the air around the Yamaguchi-gumi begins to shift. Not suddenly, not loudly, just a subtle atmospheric change, like a room growing colder before a storm that doesn't announce itself. He's not given a grand ceremony or a fancy new office. That's not his way. Instead, he moves into a modest suite on the 3rd floor of the syndicate's compound, furnished with a low table, a teapot that's always warm, and exactly 3 chairs. One for him, one for a visitor, and one for silence. From that quiet perch, he starts the next phase of his influence. By the early 1980s, the Yamaguchi-gumi isn't just the biggest crime syndicate in Japan, it's the biggest in the world. With thousands of members and dozens of affiliate groups, its reach stretches from rural ports to Tokyo's marble boardrooms. But such scale invites fragility. Ambition grows like mold in dark corners, and any weak links risk snapping the whole chain. That's where Takayama excels. His role? Quiet stabilization. He begins visiting the affiliate clans, not with entourages, but with notebooks. He asks questions, listens, observes. In an age when most lieutenants measure their power by how many men kneel before them, Takayama measures his by how many stand when he enters, not out of fear, but respect. His presence is disciplined elegance, charcoal suits, unwrinkled collars, and shoes polished to quiet perfection. He always bows first, but only just, enough to acknowledge presence, not to surrender stature. One evening, during a visit to a mid-tier clan in Shiga Prefecture, a young underboss tries to impress him with bluster, bragging about recent turf wars and debt collections. Takayama sips his tea slowly and finally says, "If bloodshed is the first tool you reach for, you've already lost the conversation." It lands like a gong in a silent temple. The meeting ends with reassigned territories and a humbled underboss who, weeks later, starts implementing conflict de-escalation protocols as if he thought of them himself. In Kobe, Shinobu Tsukasa watches all of this with calm satisfaction. He knows exactly what he has in Takayama, not just a lieutenant, but a living barometer for tension. When Takayama gets involved, things settle, not because he threatens, but because his arrival signals a kind of finality, a this-will-be-handled energy that doesn't need elaboration. They begin working more closely. Their conversations are brief, sometimes no words at all. They understand each other like two chess players who only need to glance at the board once. Tsukasa handles high-level vision, expanding into new industries, forming international alliances. Takayama handles calibration, ensuring the lieutenants stay aligned, smoothing over insulted egos before they become vendettas, and reinforcing a culture of quiet strength. Together, they're rebranding the Yamaguchi-gumi, not into saints, but into something dangerously sophisticated. Less street fights, more stock shares. Less flashy swords, more real estate portfolios. The old guard resists at first, but when their profits double without a single bullet fired, resistance folds into loyalty. Takayama introduces stricter codes of conduct. No violence without cause, no targeting civilians, no public drunkenness in uniform. At first, these rules spark mockery. Some old-timers call him the monk in a suit. Others claim he's trying to turn them into bureaucrats. But those same men later send their sons to train under him. Because while the streets remember fire, the city respects order, and Takayama's way brings both wealth and longevity. He becomes something rare, a gangster who reads quarterly reports. But he's not soft, he just believes in precision. In 1984, an internal embezzlement scandal threatens to shatter a key alliance. A senior member in Kyoto is skimming from the top, funneling protection money into a private fund. The discovery could trigger retaliation, one that might spiral into bloodshed across 4 prefectures. Takayama flies to Kyoto the same night the reports hit the table. No warning, no press. He meets with the accused in a ryokan outside the city, surrounded by pine trees and snowfall. They talk over dinner. No yelling, no guns. In the morning, the man resigns from the organization, signs over his properties, and disappears to a temple in Hokkaido. No one ever sees him again. But his family is left untouched, his debts quietly cleared. Justice, but not cruelty. People start to whisper, Takayama doesn't punish like a gangster. He punishes like a judge. That year, Forbes Japan publishes a controversial article suggesting the Yamaguchi-gumi's internal structure is more efficient than some Japanese banks. It doesn't name names, but the description of a calculating lieutenant known for reformation is unmistakably Takayama. The police, meanwhile, take notice. They begin assembling a task force. Not to arrest him, not yet, but to understand him. Surveillance reports describe his routines: morning tea, afternoon meetings, walks in the garden behind the compound. No visible vice, no parties, no scandal. A ghost in a world of blaring horns, one officer allegedly tells a colleague. We're not chasing a criminal, we're chasing a philosophy. Still, tension simmers. In 1985, the unthinkable happens. Masahisa Takenaka, the sixth-generation Kumicho, boss of the Yamaguchi-gumi, is assassinated by a rival group. It sets off what will become known as the Yama-Ichi War, a bloody conflict that will define the next decade. And in that moment of chaos, all eyes turn to Kobe, to Tsukasa, yes, but more immediately, to Takayama. He doesn't flinch, doesn't vanish. He steps into the void with calm fury. His first move? Reaffirm discipline. No rogue attacks, no unsanctioned retribution. Revenge, he tells his captains, is like misfired incense, burned too quickly, and it chokes the room. Instead, he coordinates, delegates, builds. His strategy isn't just to win the war, it's to win the aftermath. Many people still think that organized crime thrives on chaos, that empires are built through explosions and vendettas. But what if the strongest syndicates are those who treat emotion as a liability and retaliation as an investment? So what do you think? Would you follow a man into war not because he promises fire, but because you believe he's already seen the ending and it favors you? The year is 1985, and Japan's criminal underworld convulses in the wake of Masahisa Takenaka's assassination. The killing, carried out by the rival Ichiwakai faction, doesn't just mark a power play. It ignites a war that will scar Kobe and ripple through every prefecture with blood and fear. Yakuza wars are not like street gang scuffles. They are methodical, ritualized, sometimes absurd in their formalities, but no less deadly. There are rules, at least in theory, but once the blood flows, rules become rumors. In this chaos, Kiyoshi Takayama moves like the second hand on a clock, precise, inevitable, hard to stop without consequence. He doesn't assume command, not officially. That role goes to Shinobu Tsukasa, who ascends as the seventh Kumicho of the Yamaguchi-gumi. But anyone paying attention understands that in the hours between Takenaka's last breath and Tsukasa's first public move, it was Takayama holding the empire together with invisible thread. He starts with the lieutenants. One by one, he meets them. Not in war rooms, but in private homes, rented tea parlors, sometimes even graveyards. These aren't dramatic summits. They're quiet check-ins. He doesn't bark orders. He asks if their men have shoes, if their wives are sleeping well, if their books are balanced. By addressing the mundane, he stabilizes the monumental. In public, the Ichiwakai claims territory. In private, their leaders begin receiving anonymous messages, some in elegant calligraphy, others whispered through intermediaries. We know your roots. We know your sons. We won't kill unless we must. Some leave town, some stay, some disappear. Takayama is orchestrating a war, but not the kind that newspapers report. While street soldiers gear up and the media stokes fear of another Yakuza apocalypse, he's already reshaping the structure beneath the conflict. He implements fallback plans for disrupted supply chains, moves safe houses like chess pieces, even arranges for certain wounded men on both sides to receive medical care through neutral contacts. This isn't kindness, it's bookkeeping. Today's enemy could be tomorrow's leverage. Still, violence is inevitable. In Osaka, a Yamaguchi-gumi associate is gunned down outside a pachinko parlor. The hit is clumsy, too public, too bloody. Takayama is briefed that afternoon. He listens, nods once, and says, "Then we speak in silence." 3 nights later, an Ichiwakai stash house burns down. No bodies, no fingerprints, no arrests. Just charred tatami and a simple message written in black ink on the remains of the gate. Sincerity is remembered. The war drags into months. Dozens of men die. But many notice that compared to past gang wars, this one is colder, cleaner, more surgical. Takayama's fingerprints are invisible, but his influence is everywhere. Within the syndicate, his role becomes paradoxical. He is the lieutenant in war and the priest in grief. He attends funerals without speaking, leaving only incense and envelopes. He comforts widows with quiet gestures, school tuition paid in full, mortgages quietly forgiven, futures salvaged from ash. And then comes the accord. A meeting is arranged, unofficially, secretly, but with the weight of nations. Representatives from both sides gather at a shrine outside Kobe. The place is neutral ground, sacred, untouchable. Even killers remove their shoes here. Takayama arrives last. He wears a navy suit, plain tie, no rings, no watch. He carries nothing but a notebook. He doesn't speak until the final hour, and even then, only to say, "Peace is not forgetting. It is remembering, then choosing restraint. It's not a truce, not yet, but it's the beginning." Over the next year, the war fizzles, not from exhaustion, but from realization. The Ichiwakai fractures under internal pressure. The Yamaguchi-gumi, reinforced by Tsukasa's leadership and Takayama's discipline, regains dominance. Many people still think that the war ended because the Ichiwakai ran out of bullets. But insiders say it ended because Takayama convinced the room that bullets were too expensive. With the war behind him, Takayama returns to his quiet rhythms. But something has changed. His name now carries weight beyond Kobe, beyond even Japan. International syndicates begin to whisper his name with curiosity. Korean cartels ask about him in coded faxes. Triad representatives express interest in quiet cooperation, but Takayama doesn't rush expansion. He's not interested in empire for empire's sake. He wants durability, like a well-made knife, simple, sharp, and able to be passed down. Around this time, an American journalist based in Tokyo writes a piece titled "The Dawn Who Doesn't Smile." The article profiles Japan's evolving yakuza culture and names Takayama as a rare blend of samurai ethics and spreadsheet logic. It describes him as dangerous not because he strikes, but because he's already there when you think you're safe. Takayama is shown the article by a subordinate. He doesn't comment. He does, however, underline one sentence in red. His silence is the leash that keeps chaos from running wild. Internally, the Yamaguchi-gumi begins modernizing. Takayama leads the push to formalize paperwork, digitize ledgers, and streamline operations across regions. He encourages younger members to learn accounting. Legalese becomes just as important as loyalty. He even brings in consultants, real ones with MBAs, though they never know who they're working for. Still, he's not afraid of tradition. Every month, he visits shrines, lights incense, offers coins, bows deeply. But even these gestures serve a purpose. As one Kyoto scholar later muses, when Takayama prayed, it wasn't to ask for protection. It was to remind the gods that he still believed in order. One evening, during a private gathering, a young member nervously asks him how to survive in the organization. Takayama finishes his tea, then says, "You don't survive by being strong. You survive by knowing when not to be seen." It becomes an unofficial motto among his circle. Many people still think that to win a war, you must shout louder, bleed longer, and bury deeper. But what if the most effective victory is the one you don't even realize happened until your hand's no longer on the knife and someone else has already taken the blade? So what do you think? Can a man rule with silence, or must he someday raise his voice? In the years following the Yama-Ichi War, Kiyoshi Takayama enters what many in the organization quietly refer to as his era of steel. Not loud, not brash, just unmistakably solid. His presence within the Yamaguchi-gumi, already considerable, now crystallizes into something almost mythic. Shinobu Tsukasa may wear the official title of Kumicho, but it's Takayama who becomes the trusted spine of daily operations. He's the lieutenant who never overreaches, never falters, and never forgets. His role is equal parts enforcer and engineer, recalibrating the syndicate from the inside out, one conversation at a time. He begins what insiders call the rebalancing, a complete review of territory control, affiliate leadership, and financial operations across the Kansai region. But he does it in his way. No ultimatums, no reshuffles announced with fanfare. Instead, leaders find themselves reassigned not by command, but by suggestion. Over tea, in back rooms, sometimes over bowls of udon. "You'd be better suited managing Kyoto," he tells one lieutenant. "You handle Tokyo's energy better than Kobe's pace," he tells another. And they move, willingly, because Takayama doesn't ask. He aligns. It's during this restructuring that he promotes a handful of younger, more disciplined members into mid-level roles. These aren't the types who cut their teeth in alley fights. These are accountants, lawyers, logistics men, the kind who wear ties without discomfort. At first, the old guard scoffs until they realize these new recruits double their earnings and avoid half the police attention. Even still, Takayama knows when to wield tradition. He continues to honor the rituals. Monthly meetings at shrines, formal sake exchanges, annual cherry blossom gatherings. But he trims the theatrics. No longer are underbosses required to present elaborate tributes, just ledgers. If you want his respect, show your numbers. And behind all this elegance is a whisper campaign. Stories float from bar to bar, city to city. That Takayama once stared down a corrupt Tokyo official until the man simply left the room. That he never sits with his back to a door, but always knows who walked through it. That he sent a single white envelope to a rival clan, and the clan folded within days. Are they true? Maybe not all, but that's not the point. The point is, people believe them. He cultivates that ambiguity. Never confirms, never denies. He becomes the Schrödinger's boss of organized crime, always both there and not, threat and savior, silence and storm. In late 1988, a quiet drama unfolds in Nagoya. A newly formed syndicate, small, bold, and drunk on its own ambition, starts making moves on logistics contracts long protected by the Yamaguchi-gumi. They don't do it with guns, but with charm and bribes. Local politicians start shifting allegiances. Tsukasa is ready to respond harshly, but Takayama offers a different approach. "Let them talk," he says. "Then let them forget who they're talking to." He arranges a meeting, not with the gang's leaders, but with the businessmen they've bribed. No threats, just coffee, pleasantries, and carefully phrased observations. "This building you operate from," he says to one company president, "is zoned in a curious way. I wonder if you've noticed." The man pales. Within weeks, the rogue syndicate vanishes from Nagoya's balance sheets. Takayama's mastery of nonviolent pressure becomes a case study, quietly circulated among his lieutenants like a secret playbook. Still, the media continues to paint him in monochrome. Yakuza executive, shadow boss, Tsukasa's right hand. But none of these capture the fullness of his method. He's not merely supporting Tsukasa. He's constructing the system that supports Tsukasa's vision. That year, at a closed-door strategy summit, someone jokes that Takayama should be given an MBA. He replies, "Why? I already make more than the professors?" Laughter, but no contradiction. Meanwhile, law enforcement grows increasingly obsessed with him. The National Police Agency designates Takayama a key influencer in national organized crime. They begin compiling files, interviewing former associates, analyzing real estate purchases. But all they get are fragments. Bank records tied to shell companies, properties registered to spouses of cousins, conversations that loop into silence. They place informants, wiretap phones, follow cars. They learn nothing. Takayama, it seems, doesn't operate through phones. He operates around them, a detective later admits in frustration. You chase ghosts long enough, you start seeing yourself in the mirror. And then there's the incident with the judge. In 1990, a mid-level court official publicly criticizes the government's slow response to yakuza infiltration in local business. The man receives anonymous threats. Then one night, a black sedan follows him home. The driver never steps out, just sits there for hours. The next morning, the judge announces a leave of absence, citing stress. No direct connection to Takayama, no proof, just presence, the kind that hovers in the back of your mind like an unfinished sentence. But he's not without principles. In fact, it's this unwavering code that gives him a peculiar respect among even his adversaries. He forbids the sale of hard drugs in territories under his watch. They make men reckless, he says, and reckless men make the wrong kinds of enemies. He ensures that school zones remain untouched by syndicate presence. He refuses to extort elderly shopkeepers. He even compensates families caught in the crossfire of inter-clan violence, not because of guilt, but because of symmetry. To him, power isn't dominance, it's balance. And balance, like glass, is clear until it shatters. Many people still think that leadership in crime requires a taste for chaos, that you must revel in disorder to rise above it. But what if the true masters are those who tame the chaos so thoroughly it forgets how to scream? So what do you think? Would you rather follow a king who shouts on a throne, or a ghost who controls the kingdom by rearranging the air? Osaka is no longer just a territory under Kiyoshi Takayama's influence. It's become a reflection of his philosophy. The street-level violence that once defined the area has receded, replaced with an eerie kind of order. Pachinko parlors operate smoothly. Nightclubs pay their dues on time. Construction firms flourish under quiet protection. There's still crime, of course. This is the Yamaguchi-gumi. But it's been ironed, tailored, pressed into something less messy. Something more efficient. By the early 1990s, Takayama has quietly become a kingmaker within the Yamaguchi-gumi. And not just inside Japan, it starts with a whisper. A Korean businessman approaches one of Takayama's trusted lieutenants with a proposal. Cooperation on port logistics through Busan. Nothing major. Just easing customs delays. Maybe some security contracts. But Takayama sees what others miss. Not a deal, but a foothold. A toe dipped into the international waters where crime wears a necktie and drinks cappuccino. He agrees to the partnership, but sends no muscle. Instead, he sends a former accountant and a lawyer fluent in Korean and Mandarin. The deal works. Goods flow faster. Profits rise. The Korean side remarks how polite and professional the Japanese representatives are. Barely gangsters at all, one of them jokes. Takayama hears about this and simply says, "That's the point." From that point on, he becomes the quiet architect of the syndicate's international strategy. While others posture for local dominance, he's mapping shipping lanes and trade routes. He invests in portside warehouses, customs brokers, even foreign language education for his younger members. He doesn't want turf, he wants infrastructure, and his reach begins to show in strange places. A nightclub in Manila, with an oddly efficient security team. A casino in Vladivostok whose bouncers all bow at the same angle. A luxury apartment in Hong Kong, leased under a name that translates roughly to Midnight Foundation. All roads eventually trace back to Takayama. Meanwhile, inside Japan, the laws begin to tighten. The government, under increasing public pressure, passes the Anti-Boryokuden Act in 1992. For the first time, being a member of a designated organized crime group becomes a legal liability. Police gain new powers. Businesses are warned not to associate. Media begins publishing names and photos. For many yakuza bosses, it's a death knell. Some go underground, some retire, some lash out. Takayama naturally adapts. He sees it coming months ahead. His notes to Tsukasa reflect a man who knew regulation would eventually strangle the old model. He leans in, begins formalizing the syndicate's legitimate operations. He pushes for investments in construction companies, logistics firms, entertainment holdings, all clean on paper, all profitable. His fingerprints are never direct, but the structure he builds gives the Yamaguchi-gumi something priceless: deniability. He even suggests an internal rebranding. Fewer tattoos, fewer flashy cars, no more recruitment in bars. We do not need to be seen, he tells the executives, to be felt. One morning, at a closed-door leadership meeting, he lays out a diagram of shell companies that pass through 5 layers before leading back to syndicate control. An old-timer looks at the chart, squints, and says, "So, we're ghosts now?" Takayama smiles. "No, we're shadows. Ghosts have no agency." Still, not everyone is on board. A younger faction leader in Kyushu calls him the accountant's Don. He mocks the absence of violence, the endless spreadsheets, the cold demeanor. "Where's the pride?" he says in a public address. 2 months later, that same leader is found to have underreported millions in earnings and is gently but firmly relieved of his territory. No bloodshed, just paperwork, and a replacement already trained in Takayama's model. But this soft power is not without its steel edge. In 1995, after the Great Hanshin earthquake devastates Kobe, most criminal groups retreat to protect their own. Not the Yamaguchi-gumi. Under Tsukasa and Takayama's orders, syndicate members are deployed like first responders. They deliver water, food, blankets, quietly, without banners, without claiming credit. The public is confused. The media doesn't know how to frame it. But for Takayama, it's not charity. It's calibration. He understands that public perception isn't just a mirror. It's a weapon. And in that moment, the syndicate regains a sliver of legitimacy it hadn't seen in decades. He also ensures that aid distributions are recorded meticulously. He has members photograph empty shelves, smiling children, rebuilt doors. When a local official questions the legality of the activity, he's invited to a clean, white-walled office, offered tea, and shown a list of donations that surpass what the local government provided. No threats, just contrast. From then on, whispers circulate in political circles. Takayama doesn't fight the system. He designs a better one. Still, many people believe that even in crime, emotion must have a place. That somewhere, deep inside, every dawn keeps a flicker of rage or revenge or sorrow. But with Takayama, the fire seems to have been replaced by frost. One former affiliate recounts a night when a longtime friend of Takayama's died unexpectedly. The man had been with him since the early Kyoto days. At the funeral, Takayama bowed deeply, said nothing, then went back to work. He mourned like a blade being sharpened, the affiliate said. Not a tear, just focus. That year, a senior police official makes a rare public comment saying, "There are yakuza bosses, and then there is Takayama. If he wanted to run a prefecture, I'd almost vote for him." The remark draws criticism, of course, but it lingers. In private, even officers studying his operations admit admiration. They don't condone his crimes, but they respect his restraint. One says, "If every syndicate followed his rules, we'd have less blood and better balance sheets." Takayama doesn't comment on any of this. He just continues. He oversees the opening of a new headquarters branch in Tokyo, not in a seedy neighborhood, but in a nondescript office building beside 2 banks and a sushi chain. The interior has polished floors, soundproofed walls, and a reception desk staffed by someone who previously worked at a law firm. When a junior member asks if it feels too clean, Takayama simply replies, "Criminality isn't measured by dust. Many people still think that the future of the underworld belongs to those who fight the hardest." But Takayama's blueprint suggests something else. That control is more powerful than conquest, and that true dominance requires the discipline to not strike, even when you can. So what do you think? In a world where everyone wants to be loud, could the man who listens longest be the one pulling the strings? By the late 1990s, Kiyoshi Takayama's power is no longer whispered about. It's quietly acknowledged. Not celebrated, not feared in the loud sense, but understood. The way you understand gravity when standing at the edge of a roof. He doesn't need a title change. His influence is a foregone conclusion, and yet he remains the lieutenant, still the second man, still the shadow. But no one mistakes him for anything less than central. Under his guidance, the Yamaguchi-gumi doesn't just survive Japan's crackdown on organized crime. It thrives in a new form, leaner and meaner, but dressed in suits and balance sheets. While other groups fall into internal disputes or law enforcement traps, Takayama's branches continue operating with machine-like rhythm. He removes redundancies, terminates volatile partnerships, and elevates members who understand that loyalty and literacy must now coexist. His lieutenants begin referring to the restructured ranks as the Silent Bureau. Meanwhile, he starts pushing a cultural shift within the organization. The removal, or at least de-emphasis, of irizumi, the traditional yakuza tattoos. Where previous generations wore full-body ink as a badge of honor, Takayama suggests it's a liability. A scarlet letter in the eyes of modern law enforcement and a red flag to corporate partners. The younger recruits listen, not all but enough. Soon, the look of the syndicate changes. Fewer open shirts, more pressed collars, less visible muscle, more strategic muscle. Men who once sharpened blades are now carrying attachés. And the old-timers, those who still believe in ritual cuts and loyalty by pain, begin to look like dusty relics from another era. Takayama never publicly mocks them. He bows to them at ceremonies, honors their service, but they also find themselves increasingly without influence. Their domains are handed down to younger, quieter successors, ones who quote tax codes instead of street fights. He calls it the Velvet Evolution, and in typical Takayama fashion, it happens without fanfare. But not everyone likes it. A small but vocal group within the wider Yamaguchi-gumi, traditionalists from the Chubu region, begin to openly criticize the new direction. They argue that removing tattoos is the first step toward erasing identity. That crime should have style, ritual, even poetry. Takayama listens, offers tea, smiles once, then gradually reassigns their contracts, redistributes their territories, and reorganizes the supply routes. so they pass through Osaka and Tokyo instead. By the end of the year, the Chubu critics are ceremonial heads with no actual pull. Like actors without dialogue in a play they didn't know ended. He's not just neutralizing threats, he's evolving the institution. Outside of the syndicate, he becomes something of a ghostly celebrity. Tabloids run articles speculating on his net worth. $2 billion, one says. $400 million and a castle, claims another. None of them agree, and none of them get close. Reporters try to photograph him. They fail. His movements are too calculated, his routes too unpredictable. He doesn't dine at celebrity restaurants. He doesn't travel with a large entourage. When he does appear, usually for funerals or formal events, it's in nondescript black cars, stepping out beside men far more eager to be seen. In 1999, a high-profile documentary on Japanese organized crime airs on national television. It features interviews with former members, academics, and law enforcement. One voice, digitally altered and anonymous, calls Takayama the most disciplined criminal Japan has produced in 100 years. The voice adds, "He never breaks the rules. He just rewrites them so that breaking them is no longer necessary." Meanwhile, Takayama starts grooming a new class of internal leaders, not with threats, but with mentorship. He hosts weekend retreats, not in luxury resorts, but in temples and rural villas. There, junior members meditate, cook, clean, and attend lectures on everything from tax law to negotiation psychology. No guns, no initiation rituals, just quiet repetition and high standards. He tells them, "We are not thugs. We are decision makers who happen to live in the shadows." At one retreat, he brings in a university professor to teach about the history of failed empires. The lesson? Pride is the fuse, arrogance is the flame. His protégés begin calling him sensei behind closed doors. Not boss, not Don, just sensei. But the streets haven't forgotten what he is. In Sanamiya, a low-level loan shark mistakenly stiffs a payment to a business under Takayama's protection. The man brags about it in a karaoke bar, laughing that the new yakuza are just paper pushers. 3 days later, the man walks into his office and finds it completely empty. Not vandalized, not looted, just gone. All the furniture, the files, the computers, even the potted plant. A single note sits on the floor. "You've been replaced." No name, no signature, but no one has to ask. That kind of precise retribution becomes Takayama's brand. In that same year, the police attempt to charge one of his Osaka captains with racketeering. They bring forth a witness, a paper trail, even partial audio. But when the case reaches court, the witness recants. The paper trail dissolves, and the audio, recorded illegally, gets dismissed. Later, rumors surface that the witness's sick mother had her hospital bills paid in full by an anonymous donor. Coincidence? Perhaps. But in Takayama's world, coincidence is just precision without applause. Many people still think that the underworld must wear its danger openly, that suits and silence are masks hiding a hollow core. But what if the mask is the truth? What if danger, discipline, and dignity are just 3 parts of the same silhouette? So, what do you think? Can someone command a criminal empire not by roaring, but by making the whole world lean closer just to hear? By the dawn of the new millennium, Japan is changing, and so is its underworld. The nation enters the 2000s with an aging population, a faltering economy, and a government increasingly intolerant of the old codes that once allowed the yakuza to operate in plain sight. The police ramp up surveillance, the media begins naming names with more aggression, and banks close accounts linked to known affiliates. For many syndicates, it's a slow death by 1,000 policies. But for Kiyoshi Takayama, it's just another board reshaped by rules, an invitation to play smarter. This is where his influence sharpens. While others curse the changing climate, he prepares for it like a man who's been expecting winter. His network of shell companies becomes more intricate. His middlemen, once gangsters in suits, are now lawyers and consultants with untraceable pasts. His meetings shift from tatami mats to golf courses. And yet, no one forgets who he is. He becomes more visible, but only just. Public appearances increase slightly. He begins attending more funerals, more weddings, more formal gatherings of affiliate families. Always in the background, always respectful, but never passive. His nods still reassign territories. His glances still end conversations. At one funeral in 2002, a Tokyo boss attempts to assert dominance by giving a speech that hints at expanding into Osaka's holdings. Takayama simply stands, doesn't say a word, just stands. The room goes silent. The speaker falters, stammers, changes the subject, and Takayama sits again, folding his hands over his lap like a man who never intended to interrupt, only clarify. From that day forward, the speech becomes a cautionary tale told among the younger ranks. Never speak ambitions near Takayama unless you're ready to be measured for irrelevance. Internally, he begins overseeing a new initiative, an investment front disguised as a cultural preservation foundation. The organization restores historic buildings, funds local festivals, and supports traditional Japanese artisans. On the surface, it's civic pride. Beneath, it's a laundering mechanism, a loyalty test, and a recruitment filter all in one. Younger members who prove capable at managing these pseudo-legitimate projects are marked for leadership. Anyone can carry a blade, he tells a lieutenant. Show me someone who can carry a reputation. This cultural pivot is calculated. It allows the syndicate to maintain roots in the community, while appearing more like a corporation than a crime family. It also makes law enforcement hesitant to interfere. Who wants to arrest the people funding a 300-year-old temple restoration? Of course, not everything is clean. In 2004, a real estate development firm with suspected ties to the Yamaguchi-gumi is accused of pushing residents out of a Kobe neighborhood through quiet intimidation. Investigators look for connections. They find none. The board of the firm includes a retired city planner, 2 professors, and a woman who once hosted a daytime TV cooking show. And yet, it's clear, someone powerful orchestrated it. When asked about it in a rare closed-door inquiry, Takayama only says, "Gentrification is a public policy issue. We're merely efficient." There's a thin smile, no follow-up. Meanwhile, Shinobu Tsukasa continues serving as Kumicho. But more and more, it's Takayama who fields the questions. He's the one lieutenants call when the books don't balance. He's the one they look to when a border skirmish in Tokyo threatens to spiral into something worse. Tsukasa calls him the weight on the keel, the force that keeps the ship from tipping even when the winds howl. And the winds are howling. In 2005, the government proposes revisions to the anti-Boryakuten laws, stricter penalties, broader powers for regional governors to impose sanctions, even the possibility of anti-social registries to name and shame syndicate associates. The mood darkens. Many organizations begin splintering under the pressure. Some factions within the Yamaguchi-gumi even whisper about decentralizing entirely, cutting ties, operating independently. But Takayama acts quickly. He calls an emergency summit. It's held in a hot spring resort in the mountains. Off the grid, no cell service, no press, just tea, slippers, and the scent of pine. There, Takayama doesn't lecture. He listens. Then, after hours of debate, he stands before the group and outlines what he calls the quiet doctrine, a Adapt or dissolve. Visibility is weakness. Structure must evolve to survive scrutiny. The family is not a gang. The family is the mechanism. If you cannot be lawful, be undetectable. The room, full of aging bosses and ambitious underlings, falls still. By morning, the doctrine becomes the syndicate's unofficial compass. Takayama returns to Kobe with renewed control. Not taken, but handed to him by a network of men who realize the storm is real and that only one among them has ever walked through rain without getting wet. That same year, an investigative journalist publishes an article titled "The Lieutenant Who Leads Without Leading." In it, she writes, "Takayama is not the second man. He is the measure against which all others fall short." Many people still think that leadership requires declarations and titles. That power is something you grab or take or defend. But Takayama proves the opposite. That real power is the kind you don't need to explain. That by the time someone asks who's in charge, the answer is already shaping their choices. So what do you think? If leadership is silent, how can you tell when you're being led? By 2006, the Yamaguchi-gumi is not just surviving the legal chokehold. It's quietly thriving in ways that baffle the police and unsettle other crime families. The public front is seamless. The syndicate's footprint is shrinking on paper, yet its real-world influence is denser than ever. The numbers don't match. Enforcement officers keep saying it shouldn't be possible. But behind closed doors, everyone knows. It's Takayama, and something else is changing. The lieutenant begins to transition from architect to anchor, no longer just designing systems. He is the system now, an institution within an institution. Some even joke with nervous chuckles that if the Kumicho ever disappeared, the family could still run like clockwork, so long as Takayama has tea at 8. But the man himself remains as disciplined as ever. He still keeps the same hours, up before dawn, seated with reports before the city yawns awake, lunch light and solitary, evenings spent in conversation or reading. He walks through his Kobe district without bodyguards because he doesn't need them, because no one would dare. And then comes the signal. In late 2006, Shinobu Tsukasa is arrested and sent to Fuchu prison on firearm charges. It's a headline that ripples across the underworld. The Kumicho, behind bars. Now, in other families, this would trigger a civil war. Ambition flares when leadership vanishes. But in the Yamaguchi-gumi, there's no scramble, no backstabbing, no panic, because Takayama is still at his desk. He doesn't claim leadership, doesn't make announcements, but every lieutenant understands that a shift has occurred. Orders come from him now. Policies continue without disruption. Meetings still happen on schedule. The lieutenants fall in line because there is no alternative. There is only Takayama. He becomes the Kaichodari, the acting chairman, quietly, without fanfare. He doesn't redecorate the office, doesn't move into the top floor. He simply picks up the threads and tightens them. He also begins pruning. Within the first 3 months of Tsukasa's incarceration, Takayama replaces 6 regional heads. Not with drama, just quietly. One is offered early retirement. Another is sent to oversee operations in an obscure coastal town. One simply stops showing up to meetings. Replaced before the coffee cools, he knows that the moment is delicate. With Tsukasa in prison, the eyes of the nation, and more importantly, the police, turn toward him. He responds not by retreating, but by accelerating the syndicate's evolution. He oversees a new wave of investments in shipping logistics, commercial real estate, and event management, all legal on the surface, all laced with quiet influence underneath. By early 2007, even law enforcement agencies refer to him unofficially as the boss. They know Tsukasa still holds the title, But Takayama is the one shaping the present, and yet the man remains inaccessible. No interviews, no press conferences. His photo still doesn't exist in police records beyond grainy surveillance images taken from a distance. To the public, he's more rumor than man. A television producer once tries to develop a fictional crime drama inspired by Takayama. The show never airs. The station receives no threats, no visits. But 2 sponsors withdraw within days, and the lead actor, without explanation, quits the project. It fades quietly, never spoken of again. Takayama is never mentioned, but he's felt. His lieutenants adopt his methods. They stop carrying flashy watches, start holding meetings in cafes instead of clubhouses. They dress like middle managers and behave like old librarians. And the profits? They climb. That year, a Kyoto-based economist writes a controversial op-ed titled "The Yakuza as Corporation, a Case Study in Survival Economics." The article uses vague references, but every reader knows who it's about. It cites a criminal enterprise so sophisticated it avoids crime the way modern nations avoid war, by making it unnecessary. In response, a senior police commissioner grimly remarks, "That's not praise, that's prophecy." Meanwhile, Takayama continues investing in what he calls the quiet economy. Flower shops, vending machine chains, waste management, small but essential, overlooked, and nearly impossible to regulate. He even begins exploring offshore ventures, setting up accounts and investments in Singapore and the Philippines through third parties and foreign shell firms. It's global chess, played with a monk's patience, and while all this unfolds, he's also mentoring. His inner circle begins to expand, not just with Yakuza veterans, but with fresh minds, men and women trained in finance, law, logistics, and diplomacy. He doesn't call them lieutenants, he calls them kaizen, a nod to the Japanese business philosophy of continuous improvement. One of them is a former investment banker who quit after a scandal. Takayama hires him not to launder money, but to teach risk management to street-level enforcers. Another is a failed politician who now oversees real estate deals so complex, even auditors need diagrams. They adore him, not because he flatters, but because he listens. And when he speaks, it's with the weight of inevitability. Many people still think that when a boss goes to prison, the organization stumbles, that it fractures, loses direction, weakens. But in Takayama's world, a vacancy is not chaos. It's a cue, a moment rehearsed for, a role already filled. So, what do you think? Can a man lead without stepping forward, simply by staying still and letting everyone else orbit closer? By 2008, the illusion of calm surrounding the Yamaguchi-gumi has hardened into a kind of collective hallucination. On the surface, the syndicate appears subdued, less visible, less violent, less vocal. Police reports note a decline in street-level activity. Newspapers run fewer articles. The public thinks the yakuza are shrinking. But inside Kobe, inside the rooms where real decisions are made, the machine runs smoother than ever. At the heart of it sits Takayama, still unshaken, still unnamed in most official documents, and still, indisputably, the man everyone answers to. It's not a reign marked by upheaval. It's a reign marked by refinement. One of the first signs of this refinement comes in the form of paperwork. Not glamorous, not dramatic, just precise. Every affiliate family is required to submit monthly reports, not just on finances, but on community sentiment, legal exposure, and member morale. Takayama reads them all. He doesn't ask for projections. He asks for risk assessments. What might go wrong? What could break? What's too visible? And when he responds, it's with notes scribbled in crisp calligraphy. To exposed. Restructure. Move funding stream to quieter path. These aren't orders. They're diagnoses, and everyone treats them like gospel. In the same year, he implements what becomes known internally as the rotations, a system of reassigning low to mid-level members across different prefectures on temporary placements. At first, this seems disruptive. Why send a Tokyo man to Sapporo for 3 months? Why make a Kobe operator handle logistics in Fukuoka? But then the benefits appear. Members begin to cross-train. Territories learn to function independently. Loyalties shift from local bosses to the syndicate as a whole. It's subtle, but powerful. A decentralized loyalty structure, less prone to rebellion, harder to dismantle. He's building a network that doesn't just follow orders, it absorbs them. During this period, he also formalizes a rule that shocks older members. No guns, unless absolutely necessary, and only then, with his direct approval. Guns, he tells his inner circle. Create headlines. Headlines create noise. Noise draws heat. Instead, he encourages the use of contracts, legal traps, and leverage. One affiliate famously neutralizes a rival by purchasing his mistress's debt and converting it into a real estate lien. No gun. No threat. Just a phone call and a title transfer. Many within the organization begin to see Takayama less as a gangster and more as a strategic mind in exile, one that happens to operate from within a centuries-old criminal framework. By now, even government officials stop pretending he's a mystery. A report by the National Police Agency leaks in mid-2008, quietly naming him as the acting boss in all but name. The document refers to him not with criminal charges, but with organizational analysis. His leadership style mirrors that of high-level corporate governance. The press doesn't get the story right. They're still looking for cigars, red sports cars, poolside interviews. But Takayama is already 5 years ahead. He doesn't want attention. He wants infrastructure, and infrastructure is what he's building. In a dilapidated area near the Kobe docks, a development company begins buying up small properties. Over 2 years, the neighborhood transforms. Cleaner streets, new lighting, a community center. Local politicians take credit. But the funding? Quietly traced through a web of ownership that eventually lands in an investment firm chaired by one of Takayama's most trusted accountants. It's never proven, of course, but when one skeptical reporter investigates the firm, he's met with polite emails, perfect financials, and, eventually, dead ends. Then he receives a package. Inside, a bound volume of Showa-era urban planning guides. No return address. Just a sticky note that reads, "You're asking the wrong questions." The reporter drops the story. Around this time, an internal scandal nearly threatens to expose a gambling operation in Kyoto. A junior member skimmed funds. A rival clan got wind of it. Retaliation seemed imminent. Takayama calls for a temple meeting. No phones, no translators, just tatami mats, incense, and a tray of matcha served at precise temperature. He listens to both sides, then leans forward and says, "Gambling isn't the risk, emotion is." He offers reparations. Not money, property. A storage facility with embedded contracts, clean revenue, and long-term value. The rival clan accepts. The Kyoto operation stays intact. The junior member disappears. Into what? No one knows. But his mother receives a monthly stipend for the rest of her life. No drama, no press, just recalibration. And the world keeps turning. Yet even in his efficiency, Takayama is not without presence. He makes rare appearances that become events in themselves. One evening, he shows up at a wedding of a lower-tier affiliate's daughter. completely unannounced. He brings a single white envelope. No bodyguards, no fanfare. He bows to the bride, shakes the groom's hand, sits for 15 minutes, then leaves. Within hours, the groom's struggling business receives a quiet influx of capital funneled through a marketing partnership. The affiliate family never forgets the gesture, nor does the community. For weeks, the wedding is spoken of like a fable. He walked through the door, and even the sake tasted older. It's a legend-building style, a myth by minimum gesture strategy, and it works. Many people still think that criminal empires are held together by fear, that it takes threats and scars to bind men to a cause. But what if the deepest loyalties are built with predictability, honor, and quiet reward? So what do you think? If someone never raises their voice, never lifts a hand, and still moves the entire city by stepping outside, is that a man, or is that gravity? By 2009, Takayama no longer needs to speak to be heard. His silence has matured into something more than power. It has become presence, a kind of gravitational field, subtle but all-consuming. When he enters a room, it's not that people hush, it's that they recalibrate, as though noise itself recognizes it's out of place. At this point, the organization is no longer simply responding to him, it's mirroring him. The Yamaguchi-gumi has become cleaner, colder, and more complex. The old rituals still exist, yes, but behind them is a web of structures indistinguishable from high finance. Men in his inner circle now speak more about margin than muscle, market fluctuation than muscle memory. One might mistake this evolution for weakness, but those who make that mistake don't make it twice. Take the Chiba incident, for example. A construction conglomerate with Yamaguchi-gumi backing is undercut by an upstart firm tied to a smaller criminal group from Tokyo. It's the kind of provocation that would once spark retaliation in the form of tire irons and alleyway warnings. But Takayama? He sends an investment proposal, a quiet visit, a firm handshake, an offer the Tokyo firm's accountant describes later as a financial eclipse. Within weeks, the smaller group folds, not from threats, but from pressure. Contracts rerouted, licenses contested. A crucial supplier quietly pulled their trucks, citing logistical uncertainty. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, the upstart is absorbed. The old firm reclaims the deal, and Chiba becomes a case study, not in violence, but in velocity. This now is Takayama's preferred method: strategic invisibility, doing everything in full view, but without leaving a shadow. Still, there are rare moments when his tone sharpens. One of these comes in the form of a letter. Yes, a letter. Ink on paper, sealed with a red stamp. It is addressed to a lieutenant who violated the non-aggression pact by initiating a turf scuffle in Gifu. The letter is brief. Your ambition exceeds your accuracy. You've mistimed the season. Return to the soil. The next week, the lieutenant resigns, quietly. His territory is redistributed, his subordinates absorbed. He's not exiled, not punished publicly. He's just removed from the rhythm. Takayama is no longer merely enforcing order. He's composing it. Inside the syndicate, a new term emerges. Keiryose, the light touch. It's how the younger members describe his influence. He doesn't micromanage. He doesn't hover. But the moment you veer from the path, it's like walking into a draft you didn't feel coming. There's a story, perhaps apocryphal, about a Tokyo real estate mogul who insulted Takayama at a charity auction. Nothing overt, just a poorly veiled joke about old men in cheap suits. No retaliation followed. No retribution. But over the next year, The mogul's permit stalled. His contractors hesitated. A minor audit ballooned into a full investigation. By year's end, he sold his stake and relocated to Singapore. Someone asks Takayama if he had a hand in it. He responds, "I never raised a hand." He smiles just once. In 2009, the government intensifies its anti-yakuza efforts, passing new ordinances that grant prefectural governors the authority to publicly identify syndicate-affiliated businesses. The list begins to grow. But oddly, most businesses tied to the Yamaguchi-gumi under Takayama's oversight are absent. Why? Because the businesses aren't registered under members' names. They're held in trust, managed by third-party shell companies, staffed by civilians with no criminal records. If you trace the paper trail far enough, you'd hit a wall of offshore complexity, layers so dense that even legal experts throw up their hands. When questioned, one legal official mutters, "We're not chasing gangsters anymore. We're chasing spreadsheets with passports." And yet, within the organization, there is no chaos, no fear. Takayama makes sure of it. He issues what becomes known internally as the Four Walls Doctrine. Security. Every move must be shielded from retaliation. Clarity. No ambiguity in purpose or role. Redundancy. No single failure can collapse a system. Silence. Noise is luxury. Quiet is necessity. The doctrine is taught like gospel, not in lecture halls but in one-on-one sessions, shared like recipes among chefs. Each new affiliate head is given a copy, handwritten with no signature. But everyone knows, at the end of the year, with Tsukasa still incarcerated, the syndicate is stronger than it was when he entered prison. It defies expectations, logic, even the law's most aggressive tactics, and everyone knows why. Even the police commissioner in a closed-door meeting admits, "You cut the head, but the shadow stood up." Still, Takayama never claims the throne. He never seeks the title, never once calls himself Kumicho. When asked why, he offers a rare metaphor. "Titles are signs on doors. I prefer being the key." He knows, everyone knows, that 2010 is approaching, and with it, a reckoning. His name now circulates in international law enforcement briefings. The FBI flags him as a critical facilitator. South Korean intelligence calls him a ghost with fingerprints. Inside the Yamaguchi-gumi, there's no question. He is the brain, the breath, the steady hand on the wheel. But for all his discipline, all his precision, all his silence, something stirs, because for the first time, in 2010, Kiyoshi Takayama will be seen. Many people still think the most dangerous moment for a leader is when he rises. But maybe, just maybe, it's when he finally steps into the light and finds the air colder than he remembers. So what do you think? Can a shadow survive the sun? Or does it have to change its shape? The year 2010 arrives with a silence that feels rehearsed. It's not that the city has gone quiet. It's that the world around Kiyoshi Takayama seems to be holding its breath. For over 3 decades, he's operated from the edges. He's redesigned an empire, led without crown or fanfare, and become, in the words of one lieutenant, the only man who could vanish in a crowded boardroom. But 2010 isn't interested in shadows. It's the year the spotlight refuses to be ignored. It begins with a summons. In January, the Osaka police formally list Takayama under a special designation, Top Target. This isn't ceremonial, it's surgical. The authorities are now allocating full resources, coordinating across prefectures, and combing through decades of evidence. Still, Takayama doesn't blink. He doesn't alter his schedule, doesn't increase security. His lieutenants panic privately, but he reminds them, "You cannot reinforce a foundation that doesn't exist. That's the point." Meanwhile, the press circles. Newspapers begin referencing him by name. No more euphemisms, no more blurred photos. They describe him as the acting boss, the quiet shogun, the man behind the modern yakuza. His myth, long curated in whispers, now bursts onto the front page. And strangely, the effect is not panic, it's confirmation. For many in the syndicate, this is validation. Proof that the man they followed through decades of strategy, silence, and evolution was never just a rumor. Still, for Takayama, the attention is an inconvenience. He understands its timing. Shinobu Tsukasa, the official boss, is expected to be released from prison within months. The police know this. They want Takayama tied up before the house can fully stabilize. Cut the branch while the root is still recovering. And so the watch begins. He's followed, tracked, cataloged. Every car he rides in is photographed. Every building he enters is logged. Undercover officers pose as businessmen. Surveillance units camp across from his known addresses. And Takayama? He acknowledges them with small nods. Once, he sends a tray of coffee to a cold van idling near his Kobe apartment. The officers don't drink it, but they remember. Then comes the case. Extortion. A mid-level construction executive claims that Takayama demanded payments, allegedly in exchange for peaceful cooperation on an urban development project. The evidence? Thin. A wiretap transcript with ambiguities. A vague ledger. The word of one man who now lives under protective custody. But the charge is enough. In October 2010, they move. It's early morning. Rain, quiet street. Takayama steps out of his apartment in a pressed black suit, holding an umbrella with a lacquered wooden handle. He's calm, already waiting. The officers approach with hesitation. One reads the warrant. Takayama listens, nods, closes his umbrella. Then, before being escorted into the car, he turns to a nearby security camera and straightens his collar. The footage airs on every national channel that evening. The arrest of Kiyoshi Takayama, the anchor says, marks a turning point in the government's crackdown on organized crime. But inside the syndicate, there is no panic, no confusion, no restructuring. Because the machine he built doesn't require his presence to function. He designed it to endure interruption, to outlast surveillance, to breathe even when the lungs are gone. While detained, Takayama remains composed. He speaks rarely. When he does, it's brief, polite, and impenetrably vague. Prosecutors attempt to link him to dozens of operations. He denies knowledge, offers no elaboration. He refuses a lawyer's suggestion to claim diminished responsibility due to age or health. If you speak clearly, he says, you teach them how to listen. Meanwhile, supporters outside organize quietly. His businesses continue. Routines are maintained. Weekly leadership check-ins happen on schedule. He even sends word, through completely legal channels, to continue renovations on a temple project in Wakayama Prefecture. Faith, he notes, doesn't pause for rain. In prison, guards observe him closely. He wakes at dawn, meditates, reads, mostly classical literature and political theory. He never raises his voice, never complains. He folds laundry with perfect symmetry. An officer later comments, "We weren't sure if we arrested a gangster or a monk in the wrong suit." But Takayama is no mystic. He writes, not manifestos, memos, letters to lieutenants, written in perfect kanji, each no longer than a page. They contain no direct orders, just questions. What did you learn from last quarter's delay? Why is the new warehouse staffed below capacity? How would you explain loyalty without using the word? These letters, filtered through lawyers and family visits, become legend. Syndicate members begin quoting them, printing them. Some are framed and placed on office walls, not like rules, but like riddles. Inside, Takayama is charged formally. Outside, his legend swells. A tabloid runs the headline, The Don Who Never Whispered Twice. A professor publishes a paper comparing his management style to that of Renaissance banking dynasties. A former rival, when asked for comment, replies, "He led like a still river, beautiful until you realize it carved the mountain." But despite the accolades, the walls remain real, and they close in. Takayama is held in pre-trial detention for over a year. It's a strategy. Keep him isolated, wear him down, break the rhythm. But he adapts, as he always does. He exercises in his cell with folded towels and breathing patterns. He measures time not with clocks, but with how many footsteps it takes for the guard to return. He memorizes the names of everyone who brings him food, and waits, because he knows what many still don't, that syndicates don't collapse when leaders fall. They collapse when structures fail. And Takayama didn't build a throne, he built a lattice. So what do you think? If a man disappears behind bars, but the city still runs on the blueprints he left behind, has he really gone anywhere at all? The months stretch on inside the detention center, yet for Takayama, time does not decay. It distills. Each day is a discipline. He measures the silence between footsteps. He memorizes the rhythm of the flickering fluorescent lights. He times his breathing to the distant hum of a faulty ceiling vent. If prison is meant to disorient, it fails, because Takayama doesn't fear confinement. He expects it. He once told a junior lieutenant, "If you play the long game, you must accept seasons. Some with blossoms, some with snow." Now, behind steel doors and mirrored glass, he enters his winter and carries it like a coat he chose himself. The guards observe him with unease. He doesn't complain. He doesn't request special meals. He doesn't ask for more blankets or fewer questions. He rises at 5, eats everything served, keeps his cell spotless. He greets the guards by name, not warmly, just precisely. They begin referring to him as Shacho, the president, half mockery, half awe. And outside, the world expects a crumbling empire, but the Yamaguchi-gumi doesn't flinch. His lieutenants follow his rhythms like tides to the moon. The weekly meetings continue. The collections stay precise. The territories remain peaceful. Even rival families, watching for weakness, are disappointed to find none, because Takayama wasn't just a man in charge. He was a man who prepared. Inside the walls, he reads. Not novels, not memoirs, technical manuals, organizational behavior, logistics theory. He annotates in margins, then burns the pages. Not out of fear, but completion. He receives visitors sparingly, mostly lawyers, occasionally family, never underlings. He insists the structure run without him. If they can't manage, he once wrote, they were never managing. Meanwhile, prosecutors work overtime. They build a case. The charges of extortion remain shaky. They present the taped call, an exchange between Takayama and the construction executive. But the language is formal, the tone polite. At no point does Takayama make a direct demand. Wouldn't it be preferable, he says in the recording, if both sides moved forward in harmony? It's the kind of sentence you'd hear in a business negotiation or a Buddhist sermon. The prosecution struggles. They bring forward witnesses, but most are reluctant. One recants entirely. Another says, I was never threatened. I just assumed. The courts postpone, then postpone again, and through it all, Takayama watches. He never interrupts, never reacts. His face is unreadable, like a stone placed where wind once howled. One former police chief is asked, off the record, why the trial stalls. He shrugs and says, we caught him, yes, but did we ever really have him? That winter, a rumor surfaces. that Takayama submitted a handwritten statement to the court, a statement in which he neither admits nor denies guilt, but instead writes, "I have always sought balance. If the scale tips, I accept the weight. If it doesn't, then let it remain still." Whether the letter exists or not, no one confirms, but it circulates and grows. In the syndicate, younger members whisper it like scripture. One even gets it tattooed, not across his back, but inside his forearm, where only he can see it when making decisions. Back in his cell, Takayama begins a new routine. He paces, not aimlessly, deliberately. 13 steps forward, 13 steps back. Pause. Bow. Continue. A guard once asks what he's doing. Takayama replies, "Rehearsing." For what? For return or for absence. Both require choreography. The guard doesn't ask again. Outside, the media softens. The initial frenzy fades. Headlines shift. New scandals emerge. Politicians, celebrities, corporate fraud. Takayama becomes less of a villain and more of a fascination. Documentaries re-air. Academics cite him in papers on non-violent leadership within hostile frameworks. His myth evolves. In Kobe, his favorite tea house maintains a vacant table, not officially, just understood. In Nagoya, a businessman receives a check for a debt long forgotten, signed by a holding company no one traces. In Sapporo, an affiliate opens a children's center under a new charitable foundation. The name? Shizuka Kai. The Quiet Society. All threads, unseen but felt. Then, after over a year, the legal tide shifts. The court throws out key evidence. The witness testimonies fall apart. Prosecutors grumble, red-faced, but there's no path forward. And in December 2011, Kiyoshi Takayama is released on bail. He walks out the same way he went in. Calm, alone, in a perfectly pressed suit. A reporter shouts a question. "Are you still the leader?" He doesn't stop walking, but he does smile. It's brief, barely a movement, but every camera catches it. It becomes a front-page image across the country. The smile that didn't apologize. He doesn't return to the headquarters, not immediately. He spends several days in a small inn outside Kyoto, reading, walking, breathing. Visitors are denied. Calls are screened. Then quietly, he resumes his place, not on paper, but in orbit. Many people still think that when a man leaves prison, he reclaims what was his. But Takayama never lost anything, because he didn't build an empire that depended on presence. He built one that depended on pattern. So, what do you think? Is leadership a position you stand in, or a shape others make around where you used to be? The world outside prison hadn't changed much, but the way people looked at Takayama had. In his absence, he'd become not just respected, not just feared, but almost sacred. The legend of Kiyoshi Takayama was now larger than the man himself, and that, to him, was both useful and dangerous. He returned to Kobe quietly. No press conference, no welcoming committee. He stepped into the familiar compound, 3rd floor, clean hallway, pale tatami underfoot, and resumed his rituals. Tea at dawn, reports by mid-morning, a walk in the courtyard at 3 p.m. He even had his old desk chair reupholstered, not replaced. Continuity mattered, but something had shifted in the way others moved around him. They were quieter, more careful, like children who had been left alone too long and were now unsure if the rules still applied. They did, more than ever. He summoned his closest circle. Not for celebration, not for retribution, for calibration. They met in the same room where he'd once taught balance sheets to former enforcers. The same low light, the same slate-colored blinds. Only now, the weight in the air felt more like policy than punishment. Takayama sat, hands folded, voice low. "We do not return to where we were," he said. "We continue from where we were going." That was the message. No nostalgia, no revenge. Forward. And yet, outside the walls, storm clouds gathered. The 2010s saw a surge in digital surveillance, cross-border banking regulation, and a public less tolerant of even civilized criminals. Even traditional yakuza rituals, like handing out candy to children on holidays, were now banned in some cities. Crime had lost its romanticism, and the state was no longer playing chess. It was flipping the board. Takayama saw it all, and he adapted again. He called it the final phase. The strategy was clear. Dissolve visibility, solidify control, remove ego. Under his guidance, affiliates were encouraged to deregister officially from the syndicate, not to abandon it, but to recode it. They'd operate through limited partnerships, cultural organizations, international consultancies. They'd wear suits from Ginza tailors, not Shibuya flash, and they'd hold their meetings in conference rooms, not smoke-filled bars. Some resisted, the older guard mostly. One even said, "You're turning us into clerks." Takayama responded, "Then be the clerk who owns the bank." He knew that the only way forward was through abstraction. If the system couldn't be outlawed, it could be obscured. He created layers of legal buffer. Real estate was funneled through charitable endowments. Business interests were shifted into asset management firms based in Singapore, Dubai, and even Vancouver. Each was owned by someone who didn't know they were part of a tree, only that they held a branch. This fractal control, every piece disconnected from the center, yet dependent on its rhythm, was pure Takayama. One former prosecutor admitted, "We know the tree exists, but we only see leaves." But inside the syndicate, there was no doubt. His directives still arrived, sometimes as memos, sometimes as questions, always brief, always surgical. And his myth? It grew further. Stories circulated about a dinner in Kyoto, where Takayama advised a government official on pension reform, without ever mentioning the word money. About a French banker who sought his advice on discreetly exiting Japan. About a retired sumo wrestler who offered to become his personal bodyguard, only to be politely refused with a single phrase: "You're meant to be seen." The stories weren't always true, but the feeling they created, unshakable. Takayama, to many, had become not just a figure in crime, but a symbol of restraint in an era of noise. And then, just as all seemed stable, the wind shifted again. In late 2014, tensions rose within the Yamaguchi-gumi. Factions grew restless. Some whispered that Tsukasa was too old, that Takayama, still the silent steward, had no appetite to claim the top spot outright. The whispers became meetings. The meetings became documents. A split was coming. Takayama, already ill with mounting health issues, made no public comment. But his closest allies noticed the change. He spent more time in the garden, fewer hours at the desk. He handed more day-to-day operations to his protégés, saying only, "The shape will hold." It was built to. In September 2015, the split happened. A new syndicate emerged from within, the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi, and with it came headlines, questions, panic in the ranks. But Takayama did not speak, not once, not even when a rival boss insulted him publicly, not when his name was dragged into court documents, not when reporters staked out every inch of his known properties. His response? Silence. And that silence? Deafening, because many people still think power is loud. That leadership requires performance, requires presence. But what if the most commanding thing a man can do, especially when the world expects him to speak, is to remain quiet? And what if that quiet isn't surrender, but the final note in a song only he knew the end of? So what do you think? When a man walks away from the center without ever letting go of the wheel, did he vanish? Or did he just finish writing the map? As the dust settled from the 2015 Yamaguchi-gumi schism, Japan's criminal underworld found itself staring into an unfamiliar mirror. Gone were the theatrics of blood feuds and posturing at funerals. Instead, They now watched a quiet Cold War unfolding in slow motion. A war defined not by bullets, but by boardroom maneuvers and press releases written in stiff legalese. And in the middle of it all, absent but unmistakably present, was Kiyoshi Takayama. He didn't speak publicly about the split, never offered a word to the press, nor a whisper to the curious. But every move made by his protégés, every district that chose to stay loyal to the original syndicate, every territory that refrained from retaliating, it all bore the shape of his hand. He was no longer simply a lieutenant. He was now the architect emeritus. It was a strange evolution. A man, once feared for his ability to disappear, had become a stabilizing myth in an age of fragmentation. Syndicate elders spoke his name with reverence, like monks recalling a sutra. Younger members, who had never seen him in person, recited his strategies like scripture. Even rival groups began to adopt fragments of his doctrine: silence, abstraction, continuity. Internally, his directives came less frequently, but more deliberately. They arrived as single lines in encrypted letters. Never draw a map you wouldn't walk blindfolded. The loudest successor is rarely the strongest. Weakness seeks audience. Strength closes the door. They weren't orders, they were tests. And those who understood the lessons rose. Those who didn't, drifted, reassigned, absorbed, or simply vanished from relevance. Meanwhile, Takayama's health quietly declined. He was seen less in Kobe, walked more slowly when he did appear. One night, a lieutenant accompanying him to a silent temple retreat noticed a tremor in his right hand. When asked if he needed assistance, Takayama merely smiled and said, "The wind shakes the pine. It does not mean the mountain has moved." But the mountain had begun to shift. Doctors confirmed what many suspected: a complex web of ailments, hypertension, liver complications, and a deteriorating spine from years of posture too perfect for its own good. Still, he resisted rest. He insisted on attending quarterly check-ins with the legal teams managing the organization's sprawling international assets. He reviewed reports, though now with a magnifying lens. He corrected grammar, always grammar, and in 2016, he made what would become his last major maneuver. From a small retreat in the outskirts of Kyoto, he issued an internal memo, untraceable, unsigned, written on washi paper in hand-brushed ink. It outlined a complete decentralization model, a proposal to dissolve overt hierarchy in favor of independent but ideologically aligned syndicate units. No more uniforms, no more obvious branding, just values, protocols, and shared code. It was the culmination of what he'd always hinted at: a post-organizational organization, something too abstract to indict, a shape without edges, in essence Takayama's final blueprint. His inner circle met it with silent nods. They understood. The man who had turned a criminal family into a corporate ghost was now ensuring its longevity beyond structure, beyond himself, because he knew the truth most leaders never accept. Permanence isn't preserved by staying. It's preserved by knowing when to leave. Later that year, as Tsukasa officially resumed full leadership duties, Takayama gradually withdrew from meetings altogether. He retired to a private villa in the hills outside Himeji, his birthplace. He had a koi pond installed, spent mornings with tea and newspapers, occasionally entertained visitors, mostly former lieutenants who brought him news and left with fewer words than they arrived with. One visitor, a mid-ranking officer, asked if Takayama ever missed being in charge. Takayama answered without looking up from his tea, "I was never in charge. I was simply responsible." That line would later be engraved on a stone tablet by a group of junior members, placed not in a shrine, but in the courtyard of a corporate training center the syndicate ran in secret, a monument to restraint. Even in retreat, Takayama's legacy grew. Scholars began to cite him not just in criminology journals, but in business ethics case studies. A visiting Swiss professor once referred to him as the most disciplined CEO Japan never had. A retired intelligence officer told a journalist, "We couldn't catch him because he wasn't running. He was gardening, and garden he did." In his final active months, Takayama tended to a bonsai collection. Over 30 miniature trees, each pruned with meticulous attention. He gave them names. One for every territory he had once stabilized. One for every man he'd promoted. One simply called Kobe. He said, "To control the growth, you must know what to cut. But to know what to cut, you must first see the future branches." It was perhaps his last lesson, because by the end of 2017, Takayama stopped appearing altogether. No announcements, no ceremony, just a gradual retreat into silence. Some said he was ill, others said he died, but those closest to him knew better. He hadn't disappeared. He had completed his arc, and now, the structure he left behind, spread across cities and countries and spreadsheets and whispers, would speak in his place. Many people still think that legacy is a story told after you're gone. But what if the truest legacy is a pattern others follow, even while you still breathe? Too quietly to be seen, too clearly to be denied. So what do you think? Can a man become a system, and a system become a legend? The years that followed Kiyoshi Takayama's withdrawal from public life didn't dull his influence. They deepened it. His absence wasn't seen as weakness. It was interpreted instinctively as part of a larger plan, because everything Takayama ever did was on purpose. The Yamaguchi-gumi continued operating, its face still Shinobu Tsukasa, but its spine still molded by the man who no longer spoke from offices or temples. The structure he left behind functioned like a clock without a ticking sound. Just movement, just time obeying gears it couldn't see. From Himeji, Takayama communicated rarely and only through select intermediaries. He no longer touched paper. Messages came in the form of phrasing habits. Deliberate word choices passed through trusted voices. If a lieutenant said, "We will prune that branch," everyone knew who'd really said it. And yet, there were whispers that he was dying. Some claimed he no longer left the house. Others said he had taken a vow of silence. A few believed he was already dead, and his legend simply too vital to allow for confirmation. But once, just once, in early 2018, he was spotted. A lone photograph, captured by a construction worker on a hill above the villa. It showed Takayama in a linen jacket, standing near his koi pond, gazing down at the water. His hands were clasped behind his back. His posture, still immaculate. The image spread quietly among syndicate members. No public circulation, no names, just passed from one quiet man to another. One captioned it, "He is the still point in our turning world." The following months were marked by slow, deliberate moves across the Yamaguchi-gumi. Territories were consolidated, operations were merged, a large-scale investment into regional freight infrastructure was launched, facilitated not by brute force, but by zoning knowledge, community partnerships, and backroom handshakes. It was everything Takayama had spent decades teaching. Efficiency, elegance, obscurity. And then came the Quiet Pact. In late 2018, 3 formerly hostile factions signed a mutual non-aggression agreement in a ryokan outside Fukuoka. No headlines, no public records. But internally, it marked one of the largest unifications of syndicate interest in over a decade. It was, to anyone who had studied the man's methods, unmistakably Takayama's strategy. One attendee described the negotiation room. Neutral tones, no raised voices, hot towels, and a calligraphy scroll mounted in the alcove. The scroll read simply, "The river does not mourn the mountain." By 2019, what remained of Takayama's physical world had been reduced to simplicity. He no longer owned properties directly. His name appeared on nothing. The villa was maintained by a quiet staff, none of whom knew the full history of the man they served. They just knew when he rang the bell, tea must be hot. When he walked the garden, silence must reign. He no longer wrote, no longer dictated. He just tended to the trees, to the water, to memory. And inside the syndicate, that memory became culture. Training materials adopted Takayama's phrasing. Stability is a reward, not a default. Promotions began to require written reports, not just performance. Emotional control, once dismissed as weakness, became a core value. Young leaders were expected to study finance, politics, and classical literature. Some called it overreach. Others called it survival. A respected underboss, interviewed anonymously, said, "We stopped being gangsters the day he made us read the Book of 5 Rings side by side with quarterly revenue charts." Law enforcement noticed. Crime didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It became less visible, less violent, more embedded in bureaucracy, harder to arrest, harder to prove, more evolved. Some say Japan's anti-yakuza laws, while sweeping, were ultimately counterproductive. By cutting away the loudest branches, they allowed the roots to grow deeper, wrapped around civic institutions, hidden under concrete and regulations. And Takayama? He watched, perhaps not from behind curtains, maybe not even consciously, but in the same way a gardener knows, in his bones, when the soil is shifting. That summer, a small group of longtime associates visited him. They weren't there for guidance. They just wanted to see him, to sit in his presence. They brought no business, no reports, just a bottle of good shochu in silence. They sat with him in the garden. No one spoke for 20 minutes. Finally, one asked, "Are we still on course?" Takayama didn't turn. He just said, "There is no course, only the shape of the riverbed." They nodded. They understood. It was the last time most of them saw him. Later that year, internal communications across the Yamaguchi-gumi stopped referencing advisory confirmation. The operations continued. The hierarchy held. But the bridge that once spanned every uncertain gap was gone. Still no obituary, no funeral, just a vacuum that behaved like presence. And maybe that was the plan, because many people still think legacy is about what you leave behind. Money, power, empire. But Takayama taught something else. That legacy is a habit, a tone, a shape, that if you build something carefully enough, it continues to move long after the builder has set down the tools. So what do you think? When a man becomes a method, and a method becomes the world, does the man ever truly leave? By the time 2020 arrives, the world has begun to shift in ways no one could have fully anticipated. Japan, like everywhere else, reels from a global pandemic. Streets once alive with murmurs and cigarette smoke now sit hushed. The neon buzz of nightlife districts dims under health ordinances. Even the underworld, typically untouched by government rhythms, feels the tremors. But within the ranks of the Yamaguchi-gumi, the response is surprisingly fluid, because the groundwork had already been laid. Years earlier, Takayama had structured the syndicate to endure disruption, be it law enforcement, legislation, or unforeseen catastrophe. Each unit was designed with redundancy. Each financial channel had a backup. Each leader was trained not just to follow, but to think. Now, in a moment of national crisis, the system doesn't stall, it pivots. Essential services, waste management, freight logistics, industrial cleaning become unexpectedly vital. And many of these, discreetly controlled by syndicate front companies, begin to hum with new activity. Subsidies arrive. contracts multiply. Employees, most of them unaware of the ownership behind their paycheck, work overtime delivering masks, transporting cargo, sanitizing factories. And in the background of all this quiet adaptation sits Takayama's invisible signature. Though he's no longer present in person, his doctrine remains etched into every decision. He had once said in a letter to a Kyoto underboss, "A good system bends around the wind. A great one lets the wind forget it was ever trying to move something." That's what the Yamaguchi-gumi now embodies. Not resistance, but refinement. And yet, the question remains, where is Takayama? Officially, nothing is said. No obituary is published, no rites performed. His name hasn't surfaced in law enforcement documents in years. A few journalists try to dig. Freelancers mostly, with too little reach to rattle anyone. One of them writes a blog post, "The Last Shadow. Is Kiyoshi Takayama already dead?" It garners moderate attention before vanishing quietly, possibly because it veered too close to something or too far from everything. Meanwhile, in Kobe, a tea shop near the harbor quietly changes ownership. The new proprietor, a soft-spoken woman in her 60s, tells regulars that the place was gifted to her by someone who once knew the value of stillness. In Himeji, a gardener maintains a koi pond with a peculiar level of precision. He tells no stories, offers no explanation for the hand-carved wooden bench that sits by the water's edge, always clean, always untouched. And in the offices of a mid-sized investment firm in Tokyo, a framed piece of calligraphy hangs behind the reception desk. It reads, "The weight of the hand is felt most after it's lifted. Clients don't understand it, but the staff does." Internally, the syndicate stops using Takayama's name, not out of denial, but out of ritual. In its place, they refer to the doctrine. It's not written in any one place. It exists in behaviors, in choices. An affiliate once describes it like this: "It's in how we answer the phone, how we decline invitations, how we never arrive early but always before we're needed." There's reverence but not worship, because Takayama never wanted to be honored. He wanted to be applied, and applied he is, under his long-cultivated system. The syndicate weathers the storm better than many legitimate corporations. Where others shrink or panic, they recalibrate. Branches close quietly and reopen under different names. Leadership rotates, not with chaos, but with schedule. In fact, some say Takayama's greatest legacy wasn't that he changed the Yamaguchi-gumi, it's that he taught them how to change themselves. And beyond Japan, whispers begin to spread. An Indonesian shipping magnate references a Japanese silent consultant when speaking of a seamless dock expansion. A Canadian businessman speaks of a mentor who once told him, "Never speak twice if your first sentence was understood." A brief memo from a Singapore holding company is signed only KT. Is it him or is it the echo? Does it matter? Because many people still think that once a man disappears from headlines, he's gone. But Takayama was never in the headlines. He was in the margins, in the pauses, in the spaces between the official story. And so he remains, not as a name on a ledger, not as a boss at a table, but as a choice made again and again across prefectures, borders, generations. So what do you think? When a man becomes a method, and that method becomes the way people survive, isn't that the purest kind of immortality? By 2021, even those outside the world of organized crime begin to recognize the strange vacuum where Takayama used to exist. He was never seen in court again, never pictured at events, no whispers from within the prison system, no sightings, nothing. A man once impossible to pin down had now become impossible to even locate, yet his name never truly left, because everywhere his system lived, so did his influence. Inside the Yamaguchi-gumi, New leaders now refer to themselves as stewards rather than bosses. It's a linguistic shift, subtle but telling. No one wants to replace Takayama. Not even Tsukasa, who had always been his public counterpart, dares to fill that role symbolically. Instead, they channel him, mimicking the way he worked, the way he paused, the way he let others speak until they revealed too much. One newly appointed regional head in Hiroshima reportedly keeps a sand timer on his desk. He flips it before every meeting and speaks only after the last grain falls. A gift, he says. From an old teacher. There is no confirmation. There never is. Meanwhile, law enforcement begins to realize something even more concerning than organized crime. Organized absence. The newer syndicate members have no criminal records. Their businesses are clean, their accounting airtight, their meetings virtual, their allegiances untraceable. An internal police memo circulates with a simple, stark heading. Takayama's doctrine has outlived its author. The memo suggests that traditional strategies will fail unless the state adopts similarly abstract methods. But the problem? The state isn't designed for shadows. It needs edges, names, signatures. Takayama never needed those. Outside Japan, other groups begin to study his model. In Taiwan, a university criminology course includes a full semester on silent leadership, the Takayama structure. In Brazil, a cartel attempts to restructure itself into microcells using a mirrorless format traced back to a translated document titled The Quiet Doctrine. A Europol analyst famously says, he's the first crime figure who became a business school. And yet, in Kobe, life moves forward in quiet patterns. A florist shop opens beside a shuttered temple. Its owner, a woman in her 70s, never says much. But every year, on October 18th, she places a single camellia bloom in a wooden bowl by the entrance. No name, no note, just a gesture. Those who know the date recognize it. The day of Takayama's 2010 arrest. A strange day to honor, but also the day the world finally had to admit he existed. His former lieutenants, now gray at the temples and subdued in their manner, rarely speak his name aloud. But in moments of internal debate, they still ask, what would he have waited for? That's the key question. Not what would he do, but what would he delay? Because that was his power. Not force, not charisma, pacing. His greatest victories were not in action, but in the space between other men's actions. One example. In 2022, a rival group attempts to exploit the growing decentralization by making inroads into Yamaguchi-gumi controlled freight routes along the Shikoku coastline. They use legal fronts, old partners, and municipal contracts. It's surgical, but nothing happens. No response. No meeting. No retaliation. For 6 months, silence. And then one by one, the rival group's permits begin to expire. Their warehouse leases are terminated. Their suppliers suddenly find better deals elsewhere. By spring, the group is gone. No fingers pointed. No turf war headlines. Just absence. When asked how it happened, one Yamaguchi-gumi administrator replies, "We learned to let gravity do the pushing." Takayama's absence had taught them to wait. He had, in essence, made patience operational. And for many, that patience was beginning to feel like haunting. Some swore he was still alive. One claimed to have seen him at a Kyoto train station. Older, thinner, with a walking cane carved from sandalwood. Another said he bought real estate in Okinawa under a false name. A third believed he had moved to a monastery disguised as a groundskeeper, but none of it was confirmed, because none of it needed to be. He had become a kind of non-event, a presence so distilled it no longer required physical reality to persist. And within the syndicate, that suited them perfectly. After all, you can arrest a man, you can bury a man, but you can't silence a method. So what do you think? If a man leaves no fingerprints, no footprints, and no farewell, just decisions people keep making in his absence, does that count as death, or does that count as design? By 2023, the term Takayama method begins appearing outside criminal contexts altogether. It shows up in a Harvard Business Review article on decentralized leadership, in a podcast episode on behavioral economics. Even a Tokyo-based mindfulness coach refers to it, half-jokingly, as Zen Mafia management. The world, unknowingly or not, begins to apply pieces of a doctrine born in the quiet backrooms of Kobe, and yet, within the Yamaguchi-gumi, no one dares reduce him to a label. To them, he is not method. He is memory-shaped like discipline. The syndicate itself now operates with a pace that seems glacial from the outside, but deliberate within. There are fewer public arrests, fewer scandals, and fewer signatures on anything. Influence flows through soft power, real estate syndications, cultural advisory firms, niche investment vehicles. There's an entire holding group in Osaka that controls parking garages, vending machine networks, and cold chain logistics. It's bored, clean. Its investors, private. Its policies, unremarkable. But its decisions trace back, quietly, precisely, to a pattern that those in the know simply call KT. He doesn't need to exist, because he was always building something that would. One young affiliate, newly promoted to a leadership role, asks an elder during a strategic retreat, "When did you last hear from him?" The elder, staring into his cup of tea, replies, "You don't hear rivers, son. You notice when your feet are wet." That story gets passed around, becomes metaphor, then ritual. Now, it's tradition for every new officer to visit the quiet tea garden in Himeji, once Takayama's retreat, for silent reflection. No plaques, no portraits, just a bench overlooking the koi pond. They leave without photos. They leave with fewer words than they brought in. Meanwhile, outside forces remain fascinated. Interpol notes the Yamaguchi-gumi's continued stability. Unusual, they say, given its aging leadership and legal pressure. One report titles it, "Ghost Empire, Post-Leadership Resilience in Japan's Syndicated Crime." Their conclusion, the organization seems to function with embedded institutional memory. Leadership isn't held, it's emulated. A Japanese crime novelist, researching his next book, consults 3 former law enforcement officials. He asks them what they think happened to Takayama. Their responses? He never needed to vanish. He just needed to stop moving. He probably died before anyone realized, which is how he wanted it. He's alive. I don't know where, but I feel it when I walk into certain rooms. And then there are the moments, tiny, curated, unsettling. A thank you letter arrives anonymously at a civic organization in Nagasaki after a local politician's scandal quietly disappears from the news. The signature is a red stamp with a character few can translate. The donation? Enough to fund their outreach programs for 2 years. A mid-size corporate firm in Singapore suddenly changes its leadership structure, replacing its CEO with a mysterious advisor whose resume traces back to a now defunct Kobe logistics company. And in Tokyo, during a winter funeral for a recently deceased Yamaguchi-gumi patriarch, a floral arrangement appears, white camellias and cedar, tied with silk. No card, but the message is clear to those in attendance. One whispers, "It's him." The other replies, or someone remembering him properly, "It no longer matters if he lives, because he's still here." In the way meetings begin with silence, in the way no one interrupts anymore, in the way decisions are made with one eye on the 5th step ahead. Even the youngest recruits, born long after his arrest, speak of him with an odd kind of clarity, not as a myth, but as structure. He's no longer someone they wish to become. He's someone they are already built upon. And so, the Yamaguchi-gumi continues. Not loud, not brutal, not cinematic, but efficient, patient, durable. A new kind of crime syndicate. One that behaves more like weather than war. And in a world addicted to speed, outrage, and visibility, Takayama's lasting lesson becomes paradoxically revolutionary. If you must control something, let it be the pace. Many people still think a legacy is carved in stone. A grave, a statue, a signature etched into metal. But maybe the purest legacy isn't what you leave behind. Maybe it's what people keep doing, even when no one's watching. So what do you think? If no one says your name, but every step they take still echoes your rhythm, have you vanished, or have you finally arrived? By 2024, the organization once known for tattoos and swords now moves with the rhythm of spreadsheets and shadows. Its older members fade quietly into consultancy roles, while the younger generation operates with a professionalism that would make most banks jealous. And still, there's no official mention of Kiyoshi Takayama. Not in police briefings, not in news broadcasts, not even in whispers at syndicate gatherings, because silence isn't avoidance anymore, it's protocol. There's an almost spiritual reverence now, a belief that to speak his name casually is to misunderstand him entirely, like trying to explain gravity with a photograph. He's not a figure, he's a discipline. His teachings are distilled into what the new generation refers to as guiding temperatures. Not rules, not commandments, just tones of behavior. Warmth for allies, coolness for threats, stillness before impact, softness around law. No heat wasted on noise. This doctrine is never printed, never taught in official meetings. It's absorbed, like air, inside sealed rooms. And in those rooms, decisions are made that would have once required guns and legions. Now they require only leverage. In Osaka, a real estate deal goes south. A municipal official begins blocking permits tied to a redevelopment project subtly linked to the syndicate's corporate arm. There's no threat. Instead, the man receives an anonymous folder. Inside, a detailed dossier of his campaign finances, questionable expense reports, and a letter typed without greeting or signature. If your future is this messy, how can we build on your ground? The next day, the permits are cleared, and still, no one is mentioned, no fingers are pointed, because by now, Takayama's greatest gift has fully blossomed, non-attribution. The idea that no one needs to know who gave the order, only what outcome is expected. It's clean, it's cold, it's permanent, just like the man who envisioned it. Elsewhere, small rituals continue to crop up, evidence of his persistent afterimage. A leadership candidate in Fukuoka is denied promotion not because of misconduct, but because he lost his temper during a minor negotiation. The reason given? He broke temperature. A tea ceremony is now quietly held every November among upper management, each participant pouring tea with their non-dominant hand in silence. When asked why, one participant shrugs. Takayama once said, "You must feel imbalance to understand balance." He probably never said that, but it doesn't matter. His legend now moves independently of his facts, a living myth not rooted in fantasy, but in routine, the kind that guides an empire in absence of an emperor, and the empire continues to shift. In early 2024, the syndicate quietly purchases controlling interest in a regional shipping firm. It restructures the company, streamlines distribution across East Asia, and begins operating under a new name, Senko Global. The logo? 3 brushstrokes. No meaning to outsiders, but insiders recognize the shape. The same stylized K Takayama used to doodle in the margins of his notebooks during board meetings. Even that is intentional. Not memorial, just design. Because what Takayama left behind wasn't just a plan. It was a set of conditions under which order could thrive without attribution, control without credit, leadership without fingerprints. His only known quote from the last 5 years comes from a legal deposition recorded before his 2010 trial, never aired publicly until a recent documentary. The interviewer asked, "Do you see yourself as a leader of this organization?" Takayama tilted his head and replied, "Leadership is just the art of walking slightly ahead of others, without making them feel behind." And there it is. That was the blueprint. Not dominance, gravity. Now the Yamaguchi-gumi doesn't call him sensei, or oyabun, or president. They don't call him anything. They just keep doing what he taught them to do. Think twice, move once, and leave the air cleaner than when you found it. Many people still think that immortality is about being remembered. Statues, songs, speeches, but maybe the real thing, the durable kind, is about changing how the next person moves. So what do you think? When no one can see your hands on the wheel, but the vehicle still steers true? Are you gone, or have you finally become the road? As 2025 settles in, the landscape of organized crime in Japan has mutated beyond easy recognition. The syndicates once associated with tattoos, sabers, and low-lit gambling dens have adapted into something colder, quieter, harder to define. Something Kiyoshi Takayama once predicted during a hushed meeting in a Kyoto tea house, years before his arrest. The future isn't hidden, it's just diffused. That word, diffused, now appears in internal strategy decks used by syndicate-affiliated companies. Not disguised, not invisible, diffused. Spread so thin and wide across bureaucracy, politics, and finance that isolating any part makes the whole harder to see, even in his absence. Especially in his absence, Takayama's principle becomes their North Star, and by now, most have accepted that he's gone, or at least gone in the way that counts in ledgers, legal registries, and logistics manifests. There's no confirmation of death, no body, no ceremony. But there's a new rule enforced silently across the upper tiers of the organization. No one speaks of bringing him back, because he's not meant to return. To do so would break the spell, would reintroduce ego to a system designed to outlive ego. And if there's one thing Takayama taught above all else, it was this: if they can see you, they can stop you. So instead, they carry forward the architecture he designed: decentralized command, cross-border financial integration, and behavioral unification. Like a religion, but with accountants instead of prophets. And here's where it gets strange. Even groups outside the Yamaguchi-gumi start echoing his practices. In South Korea, an emerging syndicate restructures its mid-level leadership tiers, citing Takayama's cell dispersal model as the inspiration. In Russia, a criminal financier insists all major decisions be made after a full 12-hour silence period. In southern Italy, a clan restructures its loyalty system to emphasize invisible merit over blood ties, language almost pulled word for word from Takayama's known briefings. And so, in some darkly ironic twist, the man who kept Japan's underworld from fracturing is now influencing how the world fractures its own. This isn't globalization, it's ghost mirroring. And yet, the man himself, still a mystery. A handful of documents begin to surface: pension forms, real estate transfers, donations to obscure charities, all with a similar signature: K. Terra. No confirmation. But the dates line up too cleanly. The decisions bear his tone. Then, in the fall of 2025, a small article appears in a Japanese-language business journal. The piece profiles a low-profile advisor to an urban development firm in Nagasaki. The advisor is described as a soft-spoken gentleman with a limp, an obsession with moss gardens, and a habit of ending conversations with the phrase, "Don't let the current push you." His name? Kyoto Tanaka, Is it Takayama? Some think so. Others dismiss it as another decoy, or a ghost chaser's fantasy. But again, it doesn't matter, because whether it's him or not, his presence now exists in behavioral code. Habits passed like DNA. It's no longer about identity. It's about influence without authorship. Just like he wanted, one of the most telling moments happens at a closed-door leadership retreat in Kyoto. A younger lieutenant, raised in the doctrine, but not old enough to have ever met Takayama, asks a simple question during a planning session. If something new happens, something he never prepared us for, what then? An older man replies without blinking. He didn't teach us what to do. He taught us how to think before doing. That's the difference. There's no applause, just a shared silence, because everyone in the room knows. That was the real lesson. And outside, the world spins faster. AI reshapes communications. Surveillance becomes constant. Old models of secrecy begin to erode under digital pressure. But inside the Yamaguchi-gumi, the doctrine still holds. It's not reactive, it's adaptive. Because the rules Takayama laid down weren't about tactics. They were about rhythm. Rhythm doesn't age. It adjusts. You don't preserve rhythm, you follow it. And now, decades after his supposed disappearance, Kiyoshi Takayama isn't remembered like a don or a warlord. He's remembered like a pattern. You see it when meetings pause longer than usual, when a room clears in silence, when a choice gets made that favors distance over dominance, and when someone somewhere, in a suit with nothing flashy on it, says quietly, "Wait, not yet." Many people still think a man dies when his heart stops beating, when his eyes close, when his name fades from documents. But what do you think? If his timing still governs your next step, your next breath, your next pause, has he really gone, or is he just listening to see if you've learned? By early 2026, the Japanese press begins to describe the Yamaguchi-gumi with a new phrase, the quiet conglomerate. It no longer functions like the old-school crime families of tabloid nostalgia. There are no gaudy muscle cars, no street fights in broad daylight, no bloody rivalries played out in neon-lit alleys. Those days, while romanticized in cinema, have long passed. What remains is colder, more efficient, and oddly elegant. The group now operates through a constellation of legitimate entities, holding companies, real estate trusts, logistics firms, even cultural consulting agencies. It's as if the entire criminal ecosystem has been converted into executive posture. Suits instead of streetwear, spreadsheets instead of shotguns. And behind every calculated decision, there's a pause, a breath, a consideration. That breath is Takayama. He is now less of a leader and more of a tempo. One that governs how long to hold a glance, how wide to open a door, how late to return a call. In this world, speed is not power, timing is. A mid-level manager in Yokohama gets reprimanded, not for what he did, but for how fast he did it. He acted before the tea cooled, a senior notes. That phrase now circulates through internal memos as a reminder of the Takayama ethic. Deliberation before decision. Meanwhile, whispers about his whereabouts fade, not because curiosity disappears, but because speculation has become irrelevant. Whether he sits quietly in a garden in Kagoshima or passed away in a silent room years ago, the point remains. His choices continue, and sometimes those choices ripple unexpectedly. A major developer in Osaka abruptly cancels a public project that would have raised an old neighborhood, a neighborhood with no apparent value, until one urban planner links the site to a childhood photo of Takayama. No one claims responsibility, but someone, somewhere, waited just long enough for the moment to pass, just as he would have. In another part of Japan, a reporter attempts to write a retrospective piece titled The Vanishing Dawn. He gathers interviews, historical data, analysis of court documents. But after 6 months, he shelves the story. Not because of pressure or threats, but because, as he confesses in his blog, there's no narrative arc to a shadow. He's right. Takayama defies the traditional storytelling mold. No rise, no fall. Just a transition from visibility to influence. From a body to a behavior. And then, something strange happens. Foreign crime syndicates begin incorporating parts of his style. Not just structure, but ethics. A cartel in Mexico replaces its hyper-violent enforcement wing with a low-profile compliance network. They cite Takayama's notion of moral anonymity, the idea that control functions best when decoupled from personal vengeance. A Nigerian cyber ring redesigns its hierarchy to allow for succession without hierarchy, mirroring Takayama's flat trust-based model, where loyalty is based on execution, not blood. And in a speech at the United Nations on transnational crime, a Korean delegate utters the phrase, "We must learn from the invisible criminals, the ones who manage systems, not street corners." It doesn't mention him by name, but everyone in the know nods. Even fiction adapts. A best-selling detective novel features a mysterious figure called the Architect, a retired gangster who orchestrates events without leaving fingerprints. Readers assume it's based on Takayama. The author refuses to confirm because ambiguity is the tribute. Within the Yamaguchi-gumi, the final signal that his legacy is complete arrives quietly. An internal memo circulates. A single sentence, unsigned, encrypted. It reads, "The doctrine no longer needs protection. It protects us." The message is clear. The structure has absorbed the man. The rhythm no longer requires its original conductor, like a melody so deeply embedded that every note from now on carries his signature, without ever needing to mention him. Many people still think legacies are about buildings, books, or biographies. But what if legacy is just behavior passed between strangers? So what do you think? If your lessons outlive your image, if your pauses become others' instincts, if your silence trains future voices, have you faded, or have you simply become inevitable? Spring 2026. Kobe's cherry blossoms arrive a few days early. In the back streets near Shinkaichi, an elderly man walks slowly with a cane, head slightly bowed, not out of shame, but intention. His route is always the same. Past the closed pachinko parlor, around the old cinema turned co-op, ending at a bench near the harbor that overlooks the water like an old friend. No one greets him. No one interrupts. But a few pause as they pass. Some nod, subtly. Others glance and then move on, unsure if they've just seen someone famous, or no one at all. Whether it's Takayama is beside the point now. He could be anyone, because what remains is not him, but the system he seeded. And by now, that system has turned fully self-sustaining. It has no president, no supreme council, just a chain of behavioral expectations woven so deeply into the organization's fabric that stepping outside of them would feel alien. You don't disobey the doctrine, you drift from it. And if you drift too far, your decisions begin to fall apart. Not because of punishment, but because the scaffolding disappears. One Osaka-based financial front nearly collapses after a brash young executive attempts a merger without consultation. He skips the deliberation window, a Takayama standard 48-hour cooling period before large decisions. The deal fails, investors panic, and he's quietly removed. Not with ceremony, but with a handwritten note. "You moved before the weather changed. That's the punishment now." Poetic removal. There's no shouting, no broken fingers. Just exit through suggestion. Another lesson passed down from the lieutenant who feared no law. And perhaps that was always the point. Takayama didn't build an empire. He built a lens, a way of seeing risk, influence, and time as interconnected elements, like tides moving under the surface, too slow for impatient men to notice. The only ones who flourish now are those who've internalized that rhythm. A mid-level fixer in Kyoto rises to power without ever raising his voice. His nickname among peers? Shiosai, the tide's whisper. When asked how he made it up the ladder so quickly, he answers simply, "I outweighted men with better resumes." A young strategist in Fukuoka never speaks at meetings unless someone else repeats a point 3 times. Her colleagues joke she's a ghost, but her decisions? Flawless. Timed like clockwork. She calls herself a student of delay. These aren't coincidences. They're doctrine echoes. And those echoes begin to reshape how the entire underground operates, not just in Japan, but internationally. A global crime forum held in Zurich, privately, discreetly, names the Yamaguchi-gumi the most stable postmodern syndicate. One speaker compares them not to armies or corporations, but to weather patterns, predictable, seasonal, unavoidable. The conference ends with a keynote titled Legacy by Absence, the Takayama Equation. The speaker never uses a photo of him, just a blank slide with the word pause. Even in law enforcement circles, attitudes shift. An internal document from Japan's National Police Agency recommends a reframing of criminal pursuit, away from individual prosecution and toward environmental disruption. They admit that dismantling the Yamaguchi-gumi through arrests is strategically ineffective. One officer writes, "We're chasing footsteps when the man became the floor." And in that line lies the final truth. Kiyoshi Takayama was not an outlaw in the traditional sense. He was an architect of behavior, a master of drift, a man who saw law not as an obstacle, but as a variable to be absorbed. He never needed to break it, just to outlast it. And so he did. Today, the syndicate doesn't mention him, not because they've forgotten, but because he's everywhere already. He's in the tea left to cool, in the pauses between rebuttals, in the silence that follows opportunity. And that's how you know he won. Because many people still think leadership is loud, assertive, flashy. But what do you think? If every decision made in your name happens without your voice, without your face, without your permission, but still in your rhythm, is that absence or is that command at rest? The year drifts into winter. Snow touches the rooftops of Kobe like memory, soft, weightless, but persistent. Down in the older parts of the city, near where Takayama once walked with a briefcase and a limp, the air is still. Everything, it seems, is waiting. But for what? Not a return, not a resurrection, just the next echo. Because by now, even the most skeptical acknowledge it. He's not coming back, not physically. But that was never the point. What Kiyoshi Takayama created wasn't a dynasty. It was a cadence. One that outlasted titles, headlines, indictments, and even presence. A tempo so ingrained into the Yamaguchi-gumi's operations that it now breathes through boardrooms, data lines, and meetings where no one raises their voice. Inside a marble office in Tokyo, a junior executive pours tea for his superior. He waits, then speaks. "I delayed the shipment. It didn't feel like the weather." The superior nods. No scolding, just a shared understanding. This is the new language, intuition trained by rhythm. And the rhythm? Still his. Every year, fewer documents bear his initials. Fewer conversations reference his direct influence. The machine now operates independently, seamlessly. But look closely, and he's still there. In a charity donation to restore a Kyoto temple. In a logistics pivot that avoids unnecessary surveillance zones. In the silence after someone asks a question and no one rushes to answer. Those silences used to be awkward. Now they're sacred. And outside the organization, the wider world shifts too. A Silicon Valley startup models its decentralized decision-making process on Yamaguchi-gumi symmetry, a term lifted from an obscure Harvard paper that cites Takayama's leadership style as a case study in unattributed dominance. They don't realize they're quoting a ghost. Meanwhile, in a university lecture in Singapore, a professor of organizational theory compares Takayama's legacy to that of ancient philosophers. He taught by absence, he ruled by rhythm, he remains by design. And the students, most born after his last known photo, scribble down notes, intrigued, not by his crimes, but by his method. The criminal becomes curriculum. One final detail emerges, quietly, like everything else. In a rural post office outside Kyoto, a handwritten envelope arrives, addressed to a long-defunct company once linked to Takayama's real estate dealings. Inside, a single sheet of paper, folded thrice. No words, just a brush-painted circle. Enso, a symbol in Zen meaning completion without closure. No one knows who sent it, but the message is unmistakable. It's done. He's done. And yet, he isn't. Because while Kiyoshi Takayama may never appear again in any courtroom, boardroom, or photograph, the world he shaped continues without him. Not as a monument, but as motion. He didn't need a final act. He needed only to exit at the right moment, and that's exactly what he did. Many people still think that power is loud, but Takayama taught us that true power whispers. True power waits. True power becomes untraceable architecture. So what do you think? If your name vanishes, but your rhythm guides the next 100,000 decisions. If no one remembers your face, but everyone walks in your pace. If your empire no longer needs you to exist because you designed yourself out of it. Have you disappeared? Or have you become the quietest kind of eternal? Let's take a slow breath together now. You've walked beside silence tonight. Not just any silence, but the kind that carries weight. That knows when to pause, when to withdraw, and when to make its presence known only through the behavior of others. The story of Kiyoshi Takayama wasn't one of explosions or headlines. It was the kind that lingers in architecture, in policy, in every breath held before speaking. It was the story of rhythm, an empire taught not through commands, but through timing. You may not remember every detail of tonight's journey. That's all right. What matters most is how the stillness made you feel, how it softened the edges of your day, how it gave you permission to do less, to say less, to simply be. That's the magic of stories like this. Not in their endings, but in the atmosphere they leave behind. The way they guide you gently toward rest, not by lulling you, but by understanding you. So let go of the names, let go of the timelines, let go of the world outside your blanket. Right now, you don't need to remember who Takayama was. You only need to remember the quiet. Let it wrap around you. Let it slow your breathing. Let it guide you into sleep. Thanks for joining me tonight.